Classic Supernatural Stories. Read by David Rintoul, Nigel Davenport, Andrew Sachs, and Rula Lenska.
The Pavilion by Edith Nesbit. There was never a moment's doubt in her own mind, so she said afterwards. And everyone agreed that she had concealed her feelings with true womanly discretion. Her friend and confidante, Amelia Davenant, was at any rate completely deceived. Amelia was one of those featureless blondes who seem born to be overlooked. She adored her beautiful friend, and never, from first to last, could see any fault in her, except, perhaps, on the evening when the real things of the story happened. And even in that matter she owned at the time that it was only that her darling Ernestine did not understand. Ernestine was a prettyish girl, with the airs, so irresistible and misleading, of a beauty. Most people said that she was beautiful, and she certainly managed, with extraordinary success, to produce the illusion of beauty. Quite a number of plainish girls achieve that effect nowadays. The freedom of modern dress and coiffure, and the increasing confidence in herself which the modern girl experiences, aid her in fostering the illusion. But in the 60s, when everyone wore much the same sort of bonnet, when your choice in coiffure was limited to bandeaus or ringlets, and the crinoline was your only wear, something very like genius was needed to deceive the world in the matter of your personal charms. Ernestine had that genius. Hers was the smiling, ringleted, dark-haired, dark-eyed, sparkling type. Amelia had blonde bandeaus and kind, appealing blue eyes, rather too small and rather too dull. Her hands and ears were beautiful, and she kept them out of sight as much as possible. In our times the blonde hair would have been puffed out to make a frame for the forehead, a little too high. A certain shade of blue and a certain shade of boldness would have made her eyes effective. And the beautiful hands would have learned that flower-like droop of the wrist, so justly and universally admired. But, as it was, Amelia was very nearly plain, and in her secret, emotional self-communings told herself that she was ugly. It was she who, at the age of 14, composed the remarkable poem beginning, "I know that I am ugly. Did I make the face that is the laugh and jest of all?" And goes on, after disclaiming any personal responsibility for the face, to entreat the kind earth to cover it away from mocking eyes, and to let the daisies blossom where it lies. Amelia did not want to die, and her face was not the laugh and jest, or, indeed, the special interest of anyone. All that was poetic license. Amelia had read perhaps a little too much poetry, of the type of "Quand je suis morte, mes amis, plantez un saule au cimetière." But really life was a very good thing to Amelia, especially when she had a new dress and someone paid her a compliment. But she went on writing verses extolling the advantages of the tomb, and grovelling metrically at the feet of one who was another's, until that summer, when she was 19, and went to stay with Ernestine at Doricourt. Then her muse took flight, scared perhaps by the possibility, suddenly and threateningly presented, of being asked to inspire verse about the real things of life. At any rate, Amelia ceased to write poetry about the time when she and Ernestine's aunt went on a visit to Doricourt, where Frederick Powell lived with his aunt. It was not one of those hurried, motor-fed excursions which we have now and call weekends, but a long, leisurely visit, when all the friends of the static aunt called on the dynamic aunt, and both returned the calls with much state, a big barouche, and a pair of fat horses. There were croquet parties and archery parties and little dances, all pleasant, informal little gaieties, arranged without ceremony, among people who lived within driving distance of each other, and knew each other's tastes and incomes and family history as well as they knew their own. And at Doricourt life was delightful, even on the days when there was no party. It was perhaps more delightful to Ernestine than to her friend, but even so, the one least pleased was Ernestine's aunt. "I do think," she said to the other aunt, whose name was Julia, I dare say it is not so to you, being accustomed to Mr. W. Frederick, of course, from his childhood, but I always find gentlemen in the house so unsettling, especially young gentlemen, and when there are young ladies also, one is always on the qui-vive for excitement. Of course, said Aunt Julia with the air of a woman of the world, living as you and dear Ernestine do, with only females in the house. We hang up an old coat and hat of my brother's on the hat-stand in the hall, Aunt Emmeline protested. The presence of gentlemen in the house must be a little unsettling. For myself, I am inured to it. Frederick has so many friends. Mr. Thesiger, perhaps, the greatest. I believe him to be a most worthy young man, but peculiar. You know, I hope you will not think it indelicate of me to mention such a thing, but, dear Frederick, your dear Ernestine would have been in every way so suitable. Would have been? Aunt Emmeline's tortoise-shell shuttle ceased its swift movement among the white loops and knots of her tatting. Well, my dear, said the other aunt, a little shortly, you must surely have noticed. You don't mean to suggest that Amelia... I thought Mr. Thesiger and Amelia... Amelia, I really must say no. I was alluding to Mr. Thesiger's attentions to dear Ernestine. Most marked. In dear Frederick's place I should have found some excuse for shortening Mr. Thesiger's visit, but, of course, I cannot interfere. Gentlemen must manage these things for themselves. I only hope that there will be none of that trifling with the most holy affections of others, which... The less voluble aunt cut in hotly with, Ernestine's incapable of anything so unladylike. Just what I was saying, the other rejoined blandly, got up and drew the blind a little lower, for the afternoon sun was glowing on the rosy wreaths of the drawing-room carpet. Outside in the sunshine, Frederick was doing his best to arrange his own affairs. He had managed to place himself beside Miss Ernestine Mutis on the stone steps of the pavilion. But then Mr. Thesiger lay along the lower step at her feet, a very good position for looking up into her eyes. Amelia was beside him, but then it never seemed to matter whom Amelia sat beside. They were talking about the pavilion, and Amelia, who often asked uninteresting questions, had wondered how old it was. It was Frederick's pavilion, after all, and he felt this when his friend took the words out of his mouth, and used them on his own account, even though he did give the answer in the form of an appeal. "The foundations are Tudor, aren't they?" he said. "Wasn't it an observatory or laboratory or something of that sort in Fat Henry's time?" "Yes," said Frederick. "There was some story about a wizard or an alchemist, and it was burnt down, and then they rebuilt it in its present style." "The Italian style, isn't it?" said Thesiger. "But you can hardly see what it is now for the creeper." "Virginia creeper, isn't it?" Amelia asked, and Frederick said, "Yes, Virginia creeper." Thesiger said it looked more like a South American plant, and Ernestine said Virginia was in South America, and that was why. "I know, because of the war," she said modestly, and nobody smiled or answered. There were manners in those days. "There's a ghost story about it, surely," Thesiger began again, looking up at the dark, closed doors of the pavilion. "Not that I ever heard of," said the pavilion's owner. "I think the country people invented the tale because there have always been so many rabbits and weasels and things found dead near it. And once a dog, my uncle's favourite spaniel. But of course that's simply because they get entangled in the Virginia creeper, you see how fine and big it is, and can't get out, and die as they do in traps. But the villagers prefer to think it's ghosts." "I thought there was a real ghost story," Thesiger persisted. Ernestine said, "A ghost story? How delicious! Do tell it, Mr. Dorincourt. This is just the place for a ghost story. out of doors and the sun shining, so that we can't really be frightened?" Doricourt protested again that he knew no story. "That's because you never read, dear boy," said Eugene Thesiger. "That library of yours, there's a delightful book. Did you never notice it? Brown tree calf with your arms on it. The head of the house writes the history of the house as far as he knows it. There's a lot in that book. It began in Tudor times, 1515 to be exact." "Queen Elizabeth's time." Ernestine thought that made it so much more interesting. "And was the ghost story in that?" "It isn't exactly a ghost story," said Thesiger. "It's only that the pavilion seems to be an unlucky place to sleep in." "Haunted?" Frederick asked, and added that he must look up that book. "Not haunted exactly, only several people who have slept the night there went on sleeping." "Dead, he means," said Ernestine, and it was left for Amelia to ask, "Does the book tell anything particular about how the people died? What killed them, or anything?" "There are suggestions," said Thesiger. "But there, it is a gloomy subject. I don't know why I started it. Should we have time for a game of croquet before tea, Doricourt?" "I wish you'd read the book and tell me the stories," Ernestine said to Frederick apart over the croquet balls. "I will," he answered fervently. "You've only to tell me what you want." "Or perhaps Mr. Thesiger will tell us another time, in the twilight. Since people like twilight for ghosts, will you, Mr. Thesiger?" She spoke over her blue muslin shoulder. Frederick certainly meant to look up the book, but he delayed till after supper, the half-hour before bed, when he and Thesiger put on their braided smoking jackets and their braided smoking caps with the long yellow tassels, and smoked the cigars, which were in those days still more of a luxury than a necessity. Ordinarily, of course, these were smoked out of doors, or in the smoking-room, a stuffy little den littered with boots and guns and yellow-backed railway novels. But tonight Frederick left his friend in that dingy hutch and went alone to the library, found the book, and took it to the circle of light made by the colza lamp. "I can skim through it in half an hour," he said, and wound up the lamp and lighted his second cigar. But when he opened the book, he was compelled to say, "Pshaw!" Nothing short of this could relieve his feelings. "Pshaw!" said Frederick, fluttering the pages. His remark was justified. The earlier part of the book was written in the beautiful script of the early 16th century, that looks so plain and is so impossible to read, and the later pages, though the handwriting was clear and Italian enough, left Frederick helpless, for the language was Latin, and Frederick's Latin was limited to the particular passages he had been through at his private school. He recognized a word here and there, just as you or I might, but to read the complicated stuff and make sense of it. So he went to bed wishing he had happened to remember more of the Latin so painfully beaten into the best years of his boyhood. And the story of the pavilion was, after all, told by Thesiger. There was a little dance at Doricourt next evening, a carpet dance they called it. The furniture was pushed back against the walls, and the tightly stretched Axminster carpet was not so bad to dance on as you might suppose. And on this quite tolerable surface the young people danced very happily, some 10 or 12 couples. The old people did not dance in those days, except sometimes a quadrille of state, to open the ball. They played cards in a room provided for the purpose, and in the dancing-room 3 or 4 kindly middle-aged ladies were considered to provide ample chaperonage. It was on the steps of the conservatory, not the steps leading from the dancing-room, but the steps leading to the garden, that the story was told. The 4 young people were sitting together, the girls' crinolined flounces spreading around them like huge pale roses, the young men correct in their high-collared coats and white cravats. Ernestine had been very kind to both the men, a little too kind, perhaps, Who can tell? At any rate, there was in their eyes exactly that light which you may imagine in the eyes of rival stags in the mating season. It was Ernestine who asked Frederick for the story, and Thesiger who, at Amelia's suggestion, told it. "It's quite a number of stories," he said, "and yet it's really all the same story. The first man to sleep in the pavilion slept there 10 years after it was built. He was a friend of the alchemist or astrologer who built it. He was found dead in the morning. There seemed to have been a struggle. His arms bore the marks of cords. No, they never found any cords. He died from loss of blood. There were curious wounds. And that was all the rude leeches of the day could report to the bereaved survivors of the deceased." "How sunny you are, Mr. Thesiger," said Ernestine with that celebrated soft low laugh of hers. When Ernestine was elderly, many people thought her stupid. When she was young, no one seems to have been of this opinion. "And the next?" asked Amelia. "The next was 60 years later. It was a visitor that time, too, and he was found dead with just the same marks, and the doctor said the same thing, and so it went on. There have been 8 deaths altogether, unexplained deaths. Nobody has slept in it now for over 100 years. People seem to have a prejudice against the place as a sleeping apartment. I can't think why." "Isn't he simply killing?" Ernestine asked Amelia, who said, "And doesn't anyone know how it happened?" No one answered till Ernestine repeated the question in the form of, "I suppose it was just accident." "It was a curiously recurrent accident," said Thesiger. And Frederick, who throughout the conversation had said the right things at the right moment, remarked that it did not do to believe all these old legends. Most old families had them, he believed. Frederick had inherited Doricourt from an unknown great-uncle, of whom in life he had not so much as heard, but he was very strong on the family tradition. "I don't attach any importance to these tales myself." "Oh, of course not." "All the same," said Thesiger deliberately, "you wouldn't care to pass a night in that pavilion." "No more would you?" was all Frederick found on his lips. "I admit that I shouldn't enjoy it," said Eugene, "but I'll bet you 100 you don't do it." "Done," said Frederick. "Oh, Mr. Doricourt," breathed Ernestine, a little shocked at betting before ladies. "Don't," said Amelia, to whom of course no one paid any attention. "Don't do it." There was a curiously breathless little silence. Ernestine broke it. "Oh," she said, "I do wonder which of you will win. I should like them both to win, wouldn't you, Amelia? Only I suppose that's not always possible, is it?" Both gentlemen assured her that in the case of bets it was very rarely possible. "Then I wish you wouldn't," said Ernestine. "You could both pass the night there, couldn't you, and be company for each other? I don't think betting for such large sums is quite the thing. Do you, Amelia?" Amelia said no, she didn't, but Eugene had already begun to say, "Let the bet be off, then, if Miss Mutis doesn't like it. That suggestion is invaluable, but the thing itself needn't be off. Look here, Doricourt. I'll stay in the pavilion from 1 to 3, and you from 3 to 5. Then honour will be satisfied. How will that do?" The snake had disappeared. "Agreed," said Frederick. "And we can compare impressions afterwards. That will be quite interesting." Then someone came and asked where they had all got to, and they went in and danced some more dances. Ernestine danced twice with Frederick, and drank iced sherry and water, and they said good night, and lighted their bedroom candles at the table in the hall. "I do hope they won't," Amelia said, as the girls sat brushing their hair at the 2 large white muslin-frilled dressing-tables in the room they shared. "Won't what?" said Ernestine, vigorous with the brush. sleep in that hateful pavilion. I wish you'd ask them not to, Ernestine. They'd mind if you asked them. Of course I will, if you like, dear, said Ernestine cordially. She was always the soul of good nature. But I don't think you ought to believe in ghost stories. Not really. Why not? Oh, because of the Bible and going to church and all that, said Ernestine. Do you really think Roland's macabre has made any difference to my hair? It is just as beautiful as it always was, said Amelia, twisting up her own little ashen-blonde handful. What was that? That was a sound coming from the little dressing-room. There was no light in that room. Amelia went into the little room, though Ernestine said, "Oh, don't! How can you? It might be a ghost or a rat or something." And as she went, she whispered, "Hush!" The window of the little room was open, and she leaned out of it. The stone sill was cold to her elbows through her print dressing jacket. Ernestine went on brushing her hair. Amelia heard a movement below the window and listened. "Tonight will do," someone said. "It's too late," said someone else. "If you're afraid, it'll always be too late or too early," said someone. And it was Thesiger. "You know I'm not afraid," the other one, who was Doricourt, answered hotly. "An hour for each of us will satisfy honour," said Thesiger carelessly. "The girls will expect it." I couldn't sleep. Well, let's do it now and get it over. Let's see. Oh, damn it. A faint click had sounded. Dropped my watch. I forgot the chain was loose. It's all right, though. Glass not broken, even. Well, are you game? Oh, yes, if you insist. Shall I go first, or you? I will, said Thesiger. That's only fair, because I suggested it. I'll stay till 1:30 or 1:45, and then you come on. See? Oh, all right. I think it's silly, though, said Frederick. Then the voices ceased. Amelia went back to the other girl. They're going to do it tonight. Are they, dear? Ernestine was placid as ever. Do what? Sleep in that horrible pavilion. How do you know? Amelia explained how she knew. Whatever can we do? She added. Well, dear, suppose we go to bed, suggested Ernestine helpfully. We shall hear all about it in the morning. But suppose anything happens? What could happen? Oh, anything, said Amelia. Oh, I do wish they wouldn't. I shall go down and ask them not to. Amelia? The other girl was at last aroused. You couldn't. I shouldn't let you dream of doing anything so unladylike. What would the gentleman think of you? The question silenced Amelia, but she began to put on her so lately discarded bodice. I won't go if you think I oughtn't, she said. Forward and fast, Auntie would call it, said the other. I'm almost sure she would. But I'll keep dressed. I shan't disturb you. I'll sit in the dressing-room. I can't go to sleep while he's running into this awful danger. Which he? Ernestine's voice was very sharp. And there isn't any danger? Yes, there is, said Amelia suddenly, and I mean them, both of them. Ernestine said her prayers and got into bed. I don't think Auntie will be pleased, she said, when she hears that you sat up all night watching young gentlemen. Good night, dear. Good night, darling, said Amelia. I know you don't understand. It's all right. She sat in the dark by the dressing-room window. There was no moon, but the starlight lay on the dew of the park, and the trees massed themselves in bunches of a darker grey, deepening to black at the roots of them. There was no sound to break the stillness, except the little crackling of twigs and rustlings of leaves as birds or little night-wandering beasts moved in the shadows of the garden, and the sudden creakings that furniture makes if you sit alone with it and listen in the night silence. Amelia sat on and listened. Listen. The pavilion showed in broken streaks of pale grey against the wood that seemed to be clinging to it in dark patches, but that, she reminded herself, was only the creeper. She sat there for a very long time, not knowing how long a time it was, for anxiety is a poor chronometer, and the first 10 minutes had seemed an hour. She had no watch. Ernestine had, and slept with it under her pillow. The stable clock was out of order. The man had been sent for to see to it. There was nothing to measure time's flight, and she sat there, rigid, straining her ears for a footfall on the grass, straining her eyes to see a figure come out of the dark pavilion and across the dew-grey grass towards the house. And she heard nothing, saw nothing. Slowly, imperceptibly, the grey of the sleeping trees took on faint dreams of colour. The sky turned faint above the trees. The moon, perhaps, was coming out. The pavilion grew more clearly visible. It seemed to Amelia that something moved along the leaves that surrounded it, and she looked to see him come out. But he did not come. "I wish the moon would really shine," she told herself. And suddenly she knew that the sky was clear, and that this growing light was not the moon's cold shiver, but the growing light of dawn. She went quickly into the other room, put her hand under the pillow of Ernestine, and drew out the little watch with a diamond E on it. 3:15, she said aloud. Ernestine moved and grunted. There was no hesitation about Amelia now. Without another thought for the ladylike and the really suitable, she lighted her candle and went quickly down the stairs, paused a moment in the hall, and so out through the front door. She passed along the terrace. The feet of Frederick protruded from the open French window of the smoking-room. She set down her candle on the terrace. It burned clearly enough in that clear air, went up to Frederick as he slept, his head between his shoulders and his hands loosely hanging, and shook him. "Wake up," she said. "Wake up! Something's happened. It's 2:45 and he's not come back." Who's the what?" Frederick asked sleepily. "Mr. Thesiger, the pavilion." "Thesiger, you? Miss Davenant, I beg your pardon, I must have dropped off." What is it?" he said. "Is anybody ill?" Briefly, and very urgently, Amelia told him what it was, implored him to go at once and see what had happened. If he had been fully awake, her voice and her eyes would have told him many things. "He said he'd come back," he said. "Well, hadn't I better wait? Well, you go back to bed, Miss Davenant, if he doesn't come in half an hour." "If you don't go this minute," said Amelia tensely, "I shall." "Oh, well, if you insist," Frederick said. "He has simply fallen asleep as I did, dear Miss Davenant. Return to your room, I beg. In the morning, when we are all laughing at this false alarm, you will be glad to remember that Mr. Thesiger does not know of your anxiety." "I hate you," said Amelia gently. "And I am going to see what has happened. Come or not, as you like." She caught up the silver candlestick, and he followed its wavering gleam down the terrace steps and across the grey, dewy grass. Halfway she paused, lifted the hand that had been hidden among her muslin flounces, and held it out to him with a big Indian dagger in it. "I got it out of the hall," she said. "If there's any real danger, anything living, I mean, I thought... But I know I couldn't use it. Will you take it?" He took it, laughing kindly. "How romantic you are," he said admiringly, and looked at her standing there in the mingled golden grey of dawn and candlelight. It was as though he had never seen her before. They reached the steps of the pavilion and stumbled up them. The door was closed, but not locked, and Amelia noticed that the trails of creeper had not been disturbed. They grew across the doorway, as thick as a man's finger, some of them. "He must have got in by one of the windows," Frederick said. "Your dagger comes in handy, Miss Davenant." He slashed at the wet, sticky green stuff and put his shoulder to the door. It yielded at a touch, and they went in. The one candle lighted the pavilion hardly at all, and the dusky light that oozed in through the door and windows helped very little, and the silence was thick and heavy. "Thesiger," said Frederick, clearing his throat. "Thesiger? Hello? Where are you?" Thesiger did not say where he was. And then they saw. There were low seats to the windows, and between the windows low stone benches ran. On one of these something dark, and in places white, confused the dark outline of the carved stone. "Thesiger," said Frederick again, in the tone a man uses to a room that he is almost sure is empty. "Thesiger?" But Amelia was bending over the bench. She was holding the candle crookedly so that it flared and guttered. "Is he there?" Frederick asked, following her. "Is that him? Is he asleep?" "Take the candle," said Amelia, and he took it obediently. Amelia was touching what lay on the bench. Suddenly she screamed. Just one scream, not very loud. But Frederick remembers just how it sounded. Sometimes he hears it in dreams and wakes moaning, though he is an old man now, and his old wife says, "What is it, dear?" And he says, "Nothing, my Ernestine, nothing." Directly she had screamed, she said, "He's dead," and fell on her knees by the bench. Frederick saw that she held something in her arms. "Perhaps he isn't," she said. "Fetch someone from the house. Brandy. Send for a doctor. Oh, go, go, go." "I can't leave you here," said Frederick with thoughtful propriety. "Suppose he revives?" "He will not revive," said Amelia dully. "Go, go, go. Do as I tell you, go. If you don't go," she added suddenly and amazingly, "I believe I shall kill you. It's all your doing." The astounding sharp injustice of this stung Frederick into action. "I believe he's only fainted or something," he said. "When I've roused the house and everyone has witnessed your emotion, you will regret—" She sprang to her feet and caught the knife from him and raised it, awkwardly, clumsily, but with keen threatening, not to be mistaken or disregarded. Frederick went. When Frederick came back, with the groom and the gardener, he hadn't thought it well to disturb the ladies, the pavilion was filled full of white revealing daylight. On the bench lay a dead man, and kneeling by him a living woman, on whose warm breast his cold and heavy head lay pillowed. The dead man's hands were full of the green crushed leaves, and thick twining tendrils were about his wrists and throat. A wave of green seemed to have swept from the open window to the bench where he lay. The groom and the gardener and the dead man's friend looked and looked. "Looks like as if he'd got himself entangled in the creeper and lost his head," said the groom, scratching his own. "How'd the creeper get in, though? That's what I says." It was the gardener who said it. "Through the window," said Doricourt, moistening his lips with his tongue. "The window was shut, though, when I come by at 5 yesterday," said the gardener stubbornly. "How did it get all that way since 5? They looked at each other, voicing, silently, impossible things. The woman never spoke. She sat there in the white ring of her crinoline dress like a broken white rose. But her arms were round Thesiger, and she would not move them. When the doctor came, he sent for Ernestine, who came, flushed and sleepy-eyed and very frightened and shocked. "You're upset, dear," she said to her friend, "and no wonder. How brave of you to come out with Mr. Doricourt to see what happened. But you can't do anything now, dear. Come in. and I'll tell them to get you some tea." Amelia laughed, looked down at the face on her shoulder, laid the head back on the bench among the drooping green of the creeper, stooped over it, kissed it, and said quite quietly and gently, "Goodbye, dear. Goodbye," took Ernestine's arm and went away with her. The doctor made an examination and gave a death certificate. Heart failure was his original and brilliant diagnosis. The certificate said nothing, and Frederick said nothing of the creeper that was wound about the dead man's neck, nor of the little white wounds like bloodless lips half open that they found about the dead man's neck. "An imaginative or uneducated person," said the doctor, "might suppose that the creeper had something to do with his death. But we mustn't encourage superstition. I will assist my man to prepare the body for its last sleep, and then we need not have any chattering women." "Can you read Latin?" Frederick asked. The doctor could, and later did. It was the Latin of that brown book with the Doric arms on it that Frederick wanted to read. And when he and the doctor had been together with the book between them for 3 hours, they closed it and looked at each other with shy and doubtful eyes. "It can't be true," said Frederick. "If it is," said the more cautious doctor, "you don't want it talked about. I should destroy that book if I were you, and I should root up that creeper and burn it. It is quite evident from what you tell me that your friend believed that this creeper was a man-eater, that it fed just before its flowering time, as the book tells us, at dawn, and that he fully meant that the thing, when it crawled into the pavilion seeking its prey, should find you, and not him. It would have been so, I understand, if his watch had not stopped at 1 o'clock. "He dropped it, you know," said Doricourt like a man in a dream. "All the cases in this book are the same," said the doctor. "The strangling, the white wounds. I have heard of such plants. I never believed—" He shuddered. "Had your friend any spite against you, any reason for wanting to get you out of the way?" Frederick thought of Ernestine, of Thesiger's eyes on Ernestine, of her smile at him over her blue muslin shoulder. "No," he said, "none. None whatever. Must have been an accident. I am sure he did not know. He could not read Latin." He lied, being, after all, a gentleman, and Ernestine's name being sacred. "The creeper seems to have been brought here and planted in Henry VIII's time, and then the thing began. It seems to have been at its flowering season that it needed that, in short, it was dangerous. The little animals and birds found dead near the pavilion. But to move itself all that way across the floor! One would think," he corrected himself at once, "that it knew what it was doing, if such a thing were not plainly contrary to the laws of nature." "Yes," said Frederick, "one would. I think if I can't do anything more, I'll go and rest. Somehow all this has given me a turn. Poor Thesiger." His last thought before he went to sleep was one of pity. "Poor Thesiger," he said. "How violent and wicked. And what an escape for me. I must never tell Ernestine. And all the time there was Amelia. Ernestine would never have done that for me." And on a little pang of regret for the impossible, he fell asleep. Amelia went on living. She was not the sort that dies even if such a thing as happened to her on that night, when for the first and last time she held her love in her arms and knew him for the murderer he was. It was only the other day that she died, a very old woman. Ernestine, who, beloved and surrounded by children and grandchildren, survived her, spoke her epitaph. "Poor Amelia," she said. Nobody ever looked the same side of the road where she was. There was an indiscretion when she was young. Oh, nothing disgraceful, of course. She was a lady. But people talked. It was the sort of thing that stamps a girl, you know.
Tale of the Piper by Don Byrne. I first saw him as I rode from the Irish village into the gates of Destiny, a burly man with a moustache, a cheap suit of Glasgow reach-me-downs, a cap with a twisted brim, and the most evilly insolent eyes I have ever seen in a human face. At the sight of him, Pelican, that wisest and steadiest of horses, reared, and I felt a savage gust of hatred rise in me. "Now, who are you?" I asked, "and what are you doing here?" "The same question from me to you." And his eyes were studiedly insulting. An unaccountable rage made me tremble. I shook out the thong of the hunting crop and edged Pelican towards him. "I am the younger of Destiny," I informed him, "and when I pass, all folks in Destiny do me the honour of uncovering." He fumbled with his cap and took it off. His hair was shaggy and matted, like a wild man's. "I am a piper, your uncle, Sir Valentine MacFarlane, sent from the high country of Scotland home here to await his coming." I said no more and rode on. My Aunt Jennifer told me of my Uncle Valentine's letter, which Morag, her Isla maid, had read to her. My Uncle Valentine had met the man in an inn in Argyllshire, where he was stalking deer. None knows anything about him, and he is most reticent about himself, but I am persuaded he is the best piper in the world. Also, he may help revive the lost art of piping in Ireland. Now, if he had only sent me a pair of Ayrshire ploughmen, I grumbled. At dinner that night, the man threw his reeds over his shoulder and played outside the dining-room window. He broke into the rollicking country air of the Palatine's Daughter. I don't know what he did to it, but out of that tune of frolicsome rural love-making, he produced an atmosphere which made me uncomfortable. He swung from that into Thorú a Warla, the Funeral of the Barrel, a noted drinking song of how a barrel of porter went dry after a day's flax-pulling. But the picture evoked was not that of country men drinking heartily at a crossroads, but of a thieves' kitchen, where dreadful, blousy women, as of Hogarth, lay drunk with their rat-faced cut-purses. "Stop that man, James Caravan," said my Aunt Jennifer. He played no more under our window, but in the Irish village the next day he piped the desperate battle, that music that only a great piper can touch, and that night the only faction fight we had had in Destiny for 40 years broke out and raged until the police from the neighbouring villages were rushed in. He played the bells of Perth to the men from the fields, and for days afterwards I saw maidservants and young girls in the farmhouses around with red eyelids. And the young under-gardener flung down his spade and said, out of nothing, to nobody, "I'm sick of the women in this untoward place." And one morning I heard him play Is Fada Mean o Walla Shuch, I am a long time in this one town, and my own feet took an itch for the road. I said to my Aunt Jennifer at luncheon, "I was thinking now, with the winter coming, I'll give up hunting for this one season, and go and see Egypt maybe, or go as far as India. A young man ought to see the world a bit." "Shall we talk about it tonight, Kerry?" said my Aunt Jennifer. She asked me to go with her into the garden after luncheon, and sent Caravan for the piper. He arrived with his instrument under his arm. "You have never played for me yet, piper." "Your ladyship has never asked me." There was a solid dignity about him. "I suppose you have many tunes," said my Aunt Jennifer. "What I say now would be immodest in another man, but true in me. No piper has more tunes. I have the lost tunes of Macrimmon. I have tunes that were lost before Macrimmon's day. Old, dark tunes. Also tunes of my own making. Will you play me the tune of the fisherman piper? as they raised the brown sails. Christ who walked on the sea, guard us poor fisher folk. I am sorry, my lady, but I have not that tune. Please play me Bruce's hymn, God of Battles. That also, my lady, is a tune I have not. Then a merry song, piper, which you must know, the marriage feast which took place in Cana. He was solid as a rock. I am afraid that I have not that either. One of your favourite tunes is, I am a long while in this one town. He bowed with a nobleman's courtesy. It is a choice tune, he said slowly. A darling tune. Then play it, piper. Then play it, said my Aunt Jennifer. And as you are playing it, she rose up suddenly from the seat and looked at him with her blind eyes. In God's name, go. I was to wait, said the piper, until Sir Valentine returned. Both Caravan and I made a step towards him. My Aunt Jennifer must have felt us. Please, Kerry, please, James Caravan. Piper, my brother Valentine will not wish you to stay here an instant longer than I would have you stay, and I would not have you stay at all. Then I had better go, the piper said, and he swung his reeds to his shoulder, struck the piper's swagger. Do you need money for the road? My Aunt Jennifer asked. I need nothing. But you do, piper, said my Aunt Jennifer softly. I shall pray for you tonight. He dropped the pipes from his shoulder and turned around. I thank your ladyship, he said simply, but I fear it is late for that. Nevertheless, I shall, said my Aunt Jennifer. He turned and went away from us down the garden path, and what became of him is not known. He did not play his pipes as he went, but held them crumpled under his arm, and his walk was more like the rapid amble of an animal than the step of a man. I was convinced that were I to look in the gravel, I should not find the footprint of a man, but the slot of an animal. But I did not look. I was afraid.
The Lips by Henry S. Whitehead. The sole taverner, blackbirder, Luke Martin, master, up from Cartagena, came to her anchor in the harbour of St. Thomas, capital and chief town of the Danish West Indies. A Martinique barkentine, berthed to leeward of her, sent a fully manned boat ashore after the harbour-master with a request for permission to change anchorage. Luke Martin's shore-boat was only a few lengths behind the Frenchman's. Martin shouted after the officer, whom he'd landed, "Tell Larlock I'll change places with you and welcome. What are you carrying, brandy? I'll take 6 cases off you." The barkentine's mate, a French island mulatto, nodded over his shoulder and noted down the order in a leather pocketbook without slackening his pace. It was no joyful experience to lie in a semi-enclosed harbour directly to leeward of a slaver, and haste was indicated, despite propitiatory orders for brandy. "Very well, Captain," said the mate stiffly. Martin landed as the Martinique mate rounded a corner to the left and disappeared from view in the direction of the harbour-master's. Martin scowled after him, muttering to himself, "Heirs, talking English, language of the islands, thinking in French, you and your heirs, and your grandfather came out of Blackbird's ship like snot, you and your heirs." Reaching the corner the mate had turned, Martin glanced after him momentarily, then turned to the right, mounting a slight rise. His business ashore took him to the fort. He intended to land his cargo, or a portion of it, that night. The colony was short of field hands. With the help of troops from Martinique, French troops, and Spaniards from its nearer neighbour, Puerto Rico, it had just put down a bloody uprising on its subsidiary island of St. John. Many of the slaves had been killed in the joint armed reprisal of the year 1833. Luke Martin got his permission to land his cargo, therefore without difficulty, and being a Yankee bucko who let no grass grow under his feet, 4 bells in the afternoon watch saw the hatches off, and the deck of the Saul Taverner swarming with manacled blacks for the ceremony of the washing down. Huddled together, blinking in the glaring sun of a July afternoon under parallel 18, north latitude, the mass of swart humanity was soaked with handfuls of waste out of soft soap buckets. Then they were scrubbed with brushes on the ends of short handles, and rinsed off with other buckets. Boatloads of negroes surrounded the ship to see the washing down, and these were kept at a distance by a swearing third mate told off for the purpose. By 7 bells the washing down was completed, and before sundown a row of lighters, each guarded by a pair of Danish gendarmes with muskets and fixed bayonets, had ranged alongside for the taking off of the 117 blacks who were to be landed, most of whom would be sent to replenish the labourers onto the plantations of St. John, off the other side of the island of St. Thomas. The disembarking process began just after dark, to the light of lanterns. Great care was exercised by all concerned, lest any escape by plunging overboard. A tally clerk from the shore checked off the blacks as they went over the side into the lighters, and these, as they became filled, were rowed to the landing stage by other slaves, bending over 6 great sweeps in each of the stub-bowed, heavy wooden boats. Among the huddled black bodies of the very last batch stood a woman, very tall and thin, with a newborn child black as coal at her breasts. The woman stood a little aloof from the others, farther from the low rail of the Saul Taverner's forward deck, crooning to her infant. Behind her approached Luke Martin, impatient of his unloading, and cut at her thin ankles with his rhinoceros leather whip. The woman did not wince. Instead, she turned her head and muttered a few syllables in a low tone, in the Igbo dialect. Martin shoved her into the mass of blacks, cursing roundly as he cut a second time at the spindling shins. The woman turned very quietly and softly as he was passing behind her, let her head fall softly on Martin's shoulder, and whispered into his ear. The motion was so delicate as to simulate a caress, but Martin's curse died in his throat. He howled in pain as the woman raised her head, and his whip clattered on the deck boarding, while the hand which had held it went to the shoulder. The woman, deftly holding her infant, had moved in among the huddling blacks, a dozen or more of whom intervened between her and Martin, who hopped on one foot and cursed, a stream of foul epithets. Still cursing, he made his way in haste to his cabin after an antiseptic, any idea of revenge swallowed up in his superstitious dread of what might happen to him if he did not forthwith dress the ghastly wound just under his left ear, where the black woman had caused her firm, white and shining teeth to meet in the great muscle of his neck between shoulder and jaw. When he emerged 10 minutes later, the wound, now soaked in permanganate of potash and roughly clotted with a clean cloth, the last lighter, under the impetus of its 6 sweeps, was halfway ashore, and the clerk of the government from the fort was awaiting him with a bag of coin and a pair of gendarmes to guard it. He accompanied the government clerk below, where, the gendarme at the cabin door, they figured and added and counted money for the next hour. At 2 bells, under a shining moon, the Saul Taverner, taking advantage of the evening trade wind, was running for the harbour's mouth to stand away for Norfolk, Virginia, whence, empty, she would run up the coast for her home port of Boston, Massachusetts. It was midnight, what with the care of his ship coming out of even the plain and safe harbour of St. Thomas, before Martin the skipper turned in. The wound in the top of his shoulder ached dully, and he sent for Matthew Pound, his first mate, to wash it out with more permanganate, and dress it suitably. It was in an awkward place for him to manage it himself. Pound went white, and muttered under his breath at the ugly sight of it when Martin had removed his shirt painfully, and eased off the cloth he had roughly laid over it, a cloth now stiff and clotted with the exuding blood. Thereafter, not liking the look on his mate's face, nor that whitening which the sight of the place in his neck had brought about, Martin dressed the wound himself. He slept little that first night, but this was partly for thinking of the bargain he had driven with those short-handed Danes. They had been hard up for black meat, to sweat on those hillside cane fields over on St. Jan. He could have disposed easily of his entire cargo, but that, unfortunately, was out of the question. He had, what with an exceptionally slow and hot voyage across the Caribbean from Cartagena, barely enough of his said cargo left to fulfill his engagement to deliver a certain number of head in Norfolk. But he would have been glad enough to rid his hold of them all, and set his course straight for Boston. He was expecting to be married the day after his arrival. He was eager to get home. The wound ached and pained none the less, and he found it well-nigh impossible to settle himself in a comparatively comfortable position. He tossed and cursed far into the warm night. The entire side of his neck and shoulder was one searing ache when he awakened, and pushed himself upright with both hands. He could not bend his head, nor, at first, move it from side to side. Dressing was a very painful process, but he managed it. He wanted to see what the bite looked like, but, as he never shaved during a voyage, there was no glass in his cabin. He bathed the sore place gingerly with bay rum, which hurt abominably, and caused him to curse afresh. Dressed at last, he made his way up on deck, past the steward, who was laying breakfast in his cabin. The steward, he thought, glanced at him curiously. No wonder. He had to walk sidewise, with the pain of his neck, like a crab. He ordered more sail, stunsails, and these set and sheeted home. He returned to the cabin for breakfast. Mid-afternoon saw him, despite the vessel's more than satisfactory speed, in such a devilish temper that everyone on board the ship kept out of his way. He took no night watches, these being divided among the 3 mates, and after his solitary supper, punctuated with numerous curses at a more than usually awkward steward, he went into his stateroom, removed his shirt and singlet, and thoroughly rubbed the entire aching area with coconut oil. The pain now ran down his left arm to the elbow, and penetrated to all the cords of his neck, the muscles of which throbbed and burned. The imprecation gave him a certain amount of relief. He remembered that the woman had muttered something. It was not Ibu, that jargon of lingua franca which served as a medium for the few remarks necessary between the slavers and their human cattle. It was some outlandish coastal or tribal dialect. He had not caught it, sensed its meaning. He remembered vaguely the cadence of the syllables, though their meaning had been unknown to him. Swearing, aching, depressed, he turned in, and this time almost immediately he fell asleep. And in his sleep those syllables were repeated to him, into his left ear, over and over again, and in his sleep he knew their meaning. And when he awoke, a swaying beam of pouring moonlight coming through his porthole at 4 bells after midnight. Cold sweat had made his pillow clammy and wet, and stood dankly in the hollows of his eyes. Burning from head to foot, he lit the candle in his binnacle light, and cursed himself again for a fool for not acquiring a mirror through the day. young Sumner, the third mate, shaved. One or two of the forecastle hands, too. There would be mirrors on board. He must obtain one tomorrow. What was it the woman had said, those syllables? He shuddered. He could not remember. Gibberish, nigger talk. Laboriously, for he was very stiff and sore all along the left side, he climbed back into his bed after blowing out the binnacle light. Then the syllables again, over and over, and, now that he slept, and somehow knew that he slept, and could not carry their meaning into the next waking state, he knew what they meant. Asleep, drowned in sleep, he tossed from side to side of his berth, and the cold sweat ran in oily trickles into his thick beard. He awakened in the early light of morning in a state of horrified half-realization. He could not get up, it seemed. The ache now ran all through his body, which felt as though it had been beaten until flayed. One of the brandy bottles was within reach. He got it, drew the cork with his teeth, holding the bottle in his right hand, and took a long, gasping drink of the neat spirit. He could feel it through him like liquid fire. He raised the bottle again, set it back where it had been, half empty. He lay there, semi-stupefied now, vague and dreadful things working within his head, his mind, his body. Things seething there inside him, as though something had entered into him and was growing there where the focus of pain throbbed in the great muscles of his neck. There, an hour later, a timid steward found him, after repeated knocks on the stateroom door. The steward had at last ventured to open the door a mere peeping slit, and then, softly closing it behind him and, white-faced, hastened to find Pound, the first mate. Pound, after consultation with the second mate, Sumner, accompanied the steward to the stateroom door, opening off the captain's cabin. Martin lay on his right side, the bedclothes pushed down to near his waist. He slept in his singlet, and the left side of his neck was uppermost. Pound looked long at the wound, his face like chalk, his hands and lips trembling. Then he softly departed, shutting the door behind him a second time. He sought out young Sumner, and the two spoke together for several minutes. Then Sumner went below to his cabin, and, emerging on deck, looked furtively all around him. Observing the coast clear, he drew from beneath his drill jacket something twice the size of his hand, and again glancing about to make sure he was not observed, dropped the article overboard. It flashed in the bright morning sun as it turned about in the air before the waters received it forever. It was his small cabin shaving mirror. At 4 bells in the forenoon, Pound again descended to the captain's cabin. This time a weak voice answered his discreet knock, and at its invitation he entered the stateroom. Martin now lay on his back, his left side away from the door. How are you feeling, sir?" asked Pound. "Better," murmured Martin. "This damn thing." He indicated the left side of his neck with a motion of his right thumb. "I got some sleep this morning. It's better. The worst of it over, I reckon." Martin had spoken the truth when he alleged he was better. The wound ached abominably still, but the unpleasantness was distinctly lessened. He got up rather languidly, slowly pulled on his deck clothes, called for coffee through the stateroom door. Yet, when he emerged on deck, his face was drawn and haggard, and there was a look in his eyes that kept the men silent. He looked over the ship professionally, the regular 6 bells morning inspection, But he was preoccupied, and his usually intense interest was this day merely perfunctory. For nearly constantly, now that the savage pain was somewhat allayed and tending to grow less as the deck exercise cleared his mind and body of their poisons, those last syllables kept repeating themselves to him. It was as though they were constantly reiterated in his physical ear rather than merely mentally. Vague syllables, with one word, Lacunda, standing out and pounding itself deeper and deeper into his consciousness. "Hearing things," he muttered to himself as he descended to his cabin on the conclusion of the routine morning inspection a half-hour before noon. He did not go up on deck again for the noon observations. He remained, sitting very quietly there in his cabin, listening to what was being whispered over and over again in his left ear, the ear above the wound in his neck muscle. It was highly unusual for this full-blooded bucko skipper to be quiet, as his cabin steward roundly noted. The explanation was, however, very far from the steward's mind. Captain Luke Martin, for the first time in his heady and truculent career, was frightened. He ate little for his midday dinner, and immediately afterward retired to his stateroom. He came out again almost at once, however, and mounted the cabin ladder to the afterdeck. The Saul Taverner, carrying a heavy load of canvas, was spanking along at a good 12 knots. Martin looked aloft, like a sound sailorman, when he emerged on deck, but his preoccupied gaze came down and seemed to young Sumner, who touched his hat to him, to look inward. Martin was addressing him. "I want the lend of your looking-glass," said he, in quiet tones. Young Sumner started, felt the blood leave his face. This was what Pound had warned him about, why he had thrown his glass over the side. "Sorry, sir. It ain't along with me this barge, sir. I had it till we lay in St. Thomas, but now it's gone. I couldn't shave this morning, sir." He expected a bull-like roar of annoyance from the captain. Instead, Martin merely nodded absently and walked forward. Sumner watched him interestedly until he reached the hatch leading to the crew's quarters below decks forward. Then, "Cripes, he'll get one from Dave Sloane." And young Sumner ran to find Pound and tell him that the captain would probably have a looking-glass within a minute. He was very curious to know the whys and wherefores of his senior mate's unusual request about his own looking-glass. He had obeyed, but he wanted to know. For here, indeed, was something very strange. Pound had merely told him that the captain mustn't see that wound in his neck, which was high enough up, so that without a glass he could not manage to look at it. "So what's it like, Mr. Pound?" he ventured to ask. "It's what you'd name kinda livid-like," returned Pound slowly. "It's a kind of purplish. Looks like nigger lips." Back in his stateroom, Martin, after closing the door leading to the cabin, started to take off his shirt. He was halfway through this operation when he was summoned on deck. He hastily readjusted the shirt, almost shamefacedly, as though discovered in some shameful act, and mounted the ladder. Pound engaged him for 20 minutes, ship matters. He gave his decisions in the same half-hearted voice which was so new to those about him, and descended again. The bit of mirror glass, which he had borrowed from Sloane in the forecastle, was gone from his washstand. He looked painfully all over the cabin for it, but it was not there. Ordinarily, such a thing happening would have elicited a tempest of curses. Now he sat down almost helplessly and stared about the stateroom with unseeing eyes, but not with unheeding ears. The voice was speaking in English now. No longer gibberish syllables grouped about the one clear word, Lacunda. The voice in his left ear was compelling, tense, repetitive. "Over the side," it was repeating to him, and again, and yet again. "Over the side." He sat there a long time. Then at last, perhaps an hour later, he rose slowly, and with almost furtive motions began to pull off his shirt. He got it off, laid it on his berth, drew off the light singlet which he wore under it, and slowly, tentatively, with his right hand, reached for the wound in his neck. As his hand approached it, he felt cold and weak. At last his hand, fingers groping, touched the sore and tender area of the wound, felt about, found the wound itself. It was Pound who found him, 2 hours later, huddled in a heap on the cramped floor of the stateroom, naked to the waist, unconscious. It was Pound, hard old Pound, who laboriously propped the captain's great bulk, for he was a heavy-set man, standing 6 feet in height, into his chair, pulled the singlet, and then the discarded shirt over his head, and then poured brandy between his bluish lips. It required half an hour of the mate's rough restoratives, brandy, chafing of the hands, slapping the limp, huge wrists, before Captain Luke Martin's eyelids fluttered, and the big man gradually came awake. But Pound found the monosyllabic answers to his few brief questions cryptic, inappropriate. It was as though Martin were answering someone else, some other voice. "I will," he said wearily, and again, "Yeah, I will." It was then, looking him up and down in considerable puzzlement, that the mate saw the blood on the fingers of his right hand, picked up the great heavy hand now lying limply on the arm of the stateroom chair. The 3 middle fingers had been bleeding for some time. The blood from them was now dry and clotted. Pound, picking up the hand, examining it in the light of the lowering afternoon sun, saw that these fingers had been savagely cut, or, it looked like, sawed. It was as though the sore teeth that had ground and torn them had grated along their bones. It was a ghastly wound. Pound, trembling from head to foot, fumbling about the medicine case, mixed a bowl of permanganate solution, soaked the unresisting hand, bound it up. He spoke to Martin several times, but Martin's eyes were looking at something far away, his ears deaf to his mate's words. Now and again he nodded his head acquiescently, and once more, before old Pound left him sitting there limply, he muttered, Yeah, I will. Pound visited him again just before 4 bells in the early evening, supper time. He was still seated, looking somehow shrunken, apathetic. "Supper, Captain?" inquired Pound tentatively. Martin did not raise his eyes. His lips moved, however, and Pound bent to catch what was being said. Yeah, said Martin. I will. Yeah, I will. It's late in the cabin, sir, ventured Pound. But he got no reply, and he slipped out, closing the door behind him. "The captain's sick, Maguire," said Pound to the little steward. "You might as well take down the table and all that, and then go forward as soon as you've finished." "Aye, aye, sir," replied the wondering steward, and proceeded to unset the cabin table according to these orders. Pound saw him through with these duties, followed him out on deck, saw that he went forward as directed. Then he returned softly. He paused outside the stateroom door, listening. There was someone talking in there, a thick voice, like one of the negroes, but very faint, thick, guttural, but light. A voice like a young boy's or a woman's. Pound, stupefied, listened, his ear now directly against the door. He could not catch through that thickness what was being said, but it was in form by the repeated sounds. The captain's voice, alternating with the light, guttural voice, clearly a conversation like question and answer, question and answer. The ship had no boy. Of women, there was a couple of dozen, but all of them were battened below, under hatches, black women down in the stinking manhole. No one at all could have got in. The stateroom had been occupied only by the captain when he had left it 15 minutes before. He had not been out of sight of the closed door all that time, yet he listened the more intently, his mind now wholly intrigued by this strange riddle. He caught the cadence of Martin's words now, the same cadence, he knew instinctively, as that of the broken sentence he had been repeating to him in his half-dazed state while he was binding up those gashed fingers. Those fingers, he shuddered. Yeah, I will. Then the guttural, light voice, the two going on alternately, no pauses in that outlandish conversation. Abruptly, the conversation ceased. It was as though a soundproof door had been pulled down over it. Pound straightened himself up, waited a minute, then knocked on the door. The door was abruptly thrown open, and Captain Luke Martin, his eyes glassy, unseeing, stepped out, Pound giving way before him. Then he made his way straight towards the companion ladder. He was going up on deck, it seemed. His clothes hung on him now, his shirt awry, his trousers crumpled and seamed where he had lain on the floor, sat huddled up in the small chair where Pound had placed him. Pound followed him up the ladder. Once on deck, he made his way straight to the port rail. It was dark now. The subtropic dusk had lately fallen. The ship was quiet, save for the noise of her sharp bows as they cut through the middle North Atlantic swell on her 12-knot way to Virginia. Suddenly, old Pound sprang forward, grappled with Martin. The captain had started to climb the rail. Suicide! That was it, then. Those voices! The thwarting of what seemed to be his purpose aroused Martin at last. Behind him lay a middle-aged man's lifetime of command, of following his own will in all things. He was not accustomed to being thwarted, to any resistance which, aboard his own ship, always went down, died stillborn before his bull-like bellow, his truculent fists. He grappled in turn with his mate, and a long, desperate and silent struggle began there on the deck, lighted only by the light from the captain's cabin below, the light of the great binnacle lamp of whale oil, through the skylights set above decks for daytime illumination below. In the course of that silent, deadly struggle, Pound seeking to drag the captain back from the vicinity of the rail, the captain laying about him with vicious blows, the man became rapidly dishevelled. Martin had been coatless, and a great swathe of his white shirt came away in the clutching grip of Pound, baring his neck and left shoulder. Pound slackened, let go, shrank and reeled away, covering his eyes lest they be blasted from their sockets by the horror which he had seen. For there, where the shirt had been torn away and exposed the side of Martin's neck, stood a pair of blackish-purple, perfectly formed, blubbery lips. And as he gazed appalled, the lips had opened in a wide yawn, exposing great, shining African teeth, from between which, before he could bury his face in his hands away from this horror, a long, pink tongue had protruded and licked the lips. And when old Pound, shaking now to his very marrow, cold with horror of this dreadful portent there on the deck, warm with the pulsing breath of the trade wind, had recovered himself sufficiently to look again towards the place where the master of the Saul Taverner had struggled with him there against the railing, that place stood empty, and no trace of Luke Martin so much as ruffled the phosphorescent surface of the Saul Taverner's creaming wake.
The Curse of the Fires and of the Shadows by W.B. Yeats. One summer night, when there was peace, a score of Puritan troopers, under the pious Sir Frederick Hamilton, broke through the door of the Abbey of the White Friars, which stood over the Gara Loch at Sligo. As the door fell with a crash, they saw a little knot of friars gathered about the altar, their white habits glimmering in the steady light of the holy candles. All the monks were kneeling, except the abbot, who stood upon the altar steps with a great brazen crucifix in his hand. "Shoot them," cried Sir Frederick Hamilton. But none stirred, for all were new converts, and feared the crucifix and the holy candles. The white lights from the altar threw the shadows of the troopers up onto the roof and wall. As the troopers moved about, the shadows began a fantastic dance among the corbels and the memorial tablets. For a little while all was silent, and then 5 troopers, who were the bodyguard of Sir Frederick Hamilton, lifted their muskets and shot down 5 of the friars. The noise and the smoke drove away the mystery of the pale altar lights, and the other troopers took courage and began to strike. In a moment the friars lay about the altar steps, their white habits stained with blood. "Set fire to the house!" cried Sir Frederick Hamilton. And at his word one went out, and came in again carrying a heap of dry straw, and piled it against the western wall, and having done this, fell back, for the fear of the crucifix and of the holy candles was still in his heart. Seeing this, the 5 troopers who were Sir Frederick Hamilton's bodyguard darted forward, and, taking each holy candle, set the straw in a blaze. The red tongues of fire rushed up and flickered from corbel to corbel and from tablet to tablet, and crept along the floor, setting in a blaze the seats and benches. The dance of the shadows passed away, and the dance of the fires began. The troopers fell back towards the door in the southern wall, and watched those yellow dancers springing hither and thither. For a time the altar stood safe and apart in the midst of its white light, the eyes of the troopers turned upon it. The abbot, whom they had thought dead, had risen to his feet, and now stood before it, with the crucifix lifted in both hands high above his head. Suddenly he cried with a loud voice, "Woe unto all who smite those who dwell within the light of the Lord, for they shall wander among the ungovernable shadows, and follow the ungovernable fires." And having so cried, he fell on his face dead, and the brazen crucifix rolled down the steps of the altar. The smoke had now grown very thick, so that it drove the troopers out into the open air. Before them were burning houses, behind them shone the painted windows of the abbey, filled with saints and martyrs, awakened, as from a sacred trance, into an angry and animated life. The eyes of the troopers were dazzled, and for a while could see nothing but the flaming faces of saints and martyrs. Presently, however, they saw a man covered with dust who came running towards them. "Two messengers," he cried, "have been sent by the defeated Irish to raise against you the whole country about Manor Hamilton, and if you do not stop them, you will be overpowered in the woods before you reach home again. They ride north-east, between Benbulben and Cashel-na-Gael." Sir Frederick Hamilton called to him the 5 troopers who had first fired upon the monks, and said, "Mount quickly, and ride through the woods towards the mountain, and get before these men, and kill them." In a moment the troopers were gone, and before many moments they had splashed across the river at what is now called Buckley's Ford, and plunged into the woods. Gradually, as the gloom and silence of the woods oppressed them, they drew closer together, and began to talk rapidly. They were old comrades, and knew each other's lives. One was married, and told how glad his wife would be to see him return safe from this hare-brained expedition against the White Friars, and to hear how fortune had made amends for rashness. The oldest of the 5, whose wife was dead, spoke of a flagon of wine which awaited him upon an upper shelf, while a third, who was the youngest, had a sweetheart watching for his return, and he rode a little way before the others, not talking at all. Suddenly the young man stopped, and they saw that his horse was trembling. "I saw something," he said, "and yet I do not know but it may have been one of the shadows. It looked like a great worm with a silver crown upon his head." One of the 5 put his hand up to his forehead, as if about to cross himself, but remembering that he had changed his religion, he put it down and said, "I am certain it was but a shadow, for there are a great many about us, and of very strange kinds." Then they rode on in silence. It had been raining in the earlier part of the day, and the drops fell from the branches, wetting their hair and their shoulders. In a little they began to talk again. Suddenly the first 2 horses neighed, and then stood still, and would go no further. Before them was a glint of water, and they knew by the rushing sound that it was a river. They dismounted, and after much tugging and coaxing brought the horses to the riverside. In the midst of the water stood a tall old woman with grey hair flowing over a grey dress. She stood up to her knees in the water, and stooped from time to time as though washing something that half floated. The moon cast a flickering light upon it, and they saw that it was the dead body of a man, and while they were looking at it, an eddy of the river turned the face towards them, and each of the 5 troopers recognized at the same moment his own face. While they stood dumb and motionless with horror, the woman began to speak, saying slowly and loudly, "Did you see my son? He has a crown of silver on his head, and there are rubies in the crown." Then the oldest of the troopers, he who had been most often wounded, drew his sword and cried, "I have fought for the truth of my God, and need not fear the shadows of Satan," and with that rushed into the water. In a moment he returned. The woman had vanished, and though he had thrust his sword into air and water, he had found nothing. The 5 troopers remounted, and set their horses at the ford, but all to no purpose. They tried again, and went plunging hither and thither, the horses foaming and rearing. "Let us," said the old trooper, "ride back a little into the wood, and strike the river higher up." They rode in under the boughs, the ground ivy crackling under the hoofs, and the branches striking against their steel caps. After about 20 minutes' riding, they came out again upon the river, and after another 10 minutes found a place where it was possible to cross without sinking below the stirrups. The wood upon the other side was very thin, and broke the moonlight into long streams. The wind had arisen, and had begun to drive the clouds rapidly across the face of the moon, so that thin streams of light seemed to be dancing a grotesque dance among the scattered bushes and small fir trees. The tops of the trees began also to moan, and the sound of it was like the voice of the dead in the wind, and the troopers remembered the belief that tells how the dead in purgatory are spitted upon the points of the trees and upon the points of the rocks. They turned a little to the south, in the hope that they might strike the beaten path again, but they could find no trace of it. Meanwhile, the moaning grew louder and louder, and the dance of the white moon fires more and more rapid. Gradually they began to be aware of a sound of distant music. It was the sound of a bagpipe, and they rode towards it with great joy. It came from the bottom of a deep, cup-like hollow. In the midst of the hollow was an old man with a red cap and withered face. He sat beside a fire of sticks, and had a burning torch thrust into the earth at his feet, and played an old bagpipe furiously. His red hair dripped over his face like the iron rust upon a rock. "Did you see my wife?" he cried, looking up a moment. "She was washing. She was washing." "I am afraid of him," said the young trooper. "I fear he is one of the Shia." "No," said the old trooper. "He is a man, for I can see the sun freckles upon his face. We will compel him to be our guide." And at that he drew his sword, and the others did the same. They stood in a ring round the piper, and pointed their swords at him, and the old trooper then told him that they must kill 2 rebels who had taken the road between Ben Bulben and the great mountain spur that is called Cashanagoil, and that he must get up before one of them and be their guide, for they had lost their way. The piper turned and pointed to a neighbouring tree, and they saw an old white horse, ready bitted, bridled, and saddled. He slung the pipe across his back, and, taking the torch in his hand, got up upon the horse, and started off before them as hard as he could go. The wood grew thinner and thinner, and the ground began to slope up toward the mountain. The ground sloped more and more, until at last they rode far above the woods upon the wide top of the mountain. The woods lay spread out mile after mile below, and away to the south shot up the red glare of the burning town. But before and above them were the little white flames. The guide drew rein suddenly, and pointing upwards with the hand that did not hold the torch, shrieked out, "Look! Look at the holy candles!" and then plunged forward at a gallop, waving the torch hither and thither. "Do you hear the hoofs of the messengers?" cried the guide. "Quick, quick, or they will be gone out of your hands!" And he laughed, as with delight of the chase. The troopers thought they could hear, far off, as if below them, rattle of hoofs. But now the ground began to slope more and more, and the speed grew more headlong moment by moment. They tried to pull up, but in vain, for the horses seemed to have gone mad. The guide had thrown the reins onto the neck of the old white horse, and was waving his arms and singing a wild Gaelic song. Suddenly they saw the thin gleam of a river at an immense distance below, and knew that they were upon the brink of the abyss that is now called Lugnagoil, or in English, the Stranger's Leap. The 6 horses sprang forward, and 5 screams went up into the air. A moment later, 5 men and horses fell with a dull crash upon the green slopes at the foot of the rocks.
A Playhouse in the Waste by George Moore. It's a closed mouth that can hold a good story, as the saying goes, and very soon it got about that Father MacTurnan had written to Rome, saying he was willing to take a wife to his bosom for patriotic reasons, if the Pope would relieve him of his vow of celibacy. And many phrases and words from his letter, translated by whom? By the bishop or Father Meehan? Nobody ever knew, were related over the Dublin firesides, till at last out of the talk a tall, gaunt man emerged, in an old overcoat, green from weather and wear, the tails of it flapping as he rode his bicycle through the great waste bog that lies between Belmullet and Crossmelina. His name. We liked it. It appealed to our imagination. MacTurnan. It conveyed something from afar, like Hamlet or Don Quixote. He seemed as near and as far from us as they, till Pat Cromer, one of the organizers of the IAOS, came in and said, after listening to the talk that was going round, "Is it of the priest that rides in the great Mayo bog you're speaking? If it is, you haven't got the story rightly." And he told us this story. We sat wondering greatly, for we seemed to see a soul on its way to heaven. But round afar there is always one who cannot get off the subject of women and blasphemy. A papist, generally, he is. And it was Quinn that evening who kept plaguing us with jokes, whether it would be a fat girl or a thin that the priest would choose, if the Pope gave him leave to marry, until at last, losing all patience with him, I bade him be silent, and asked Pat Cromer to tell us if the priest was meditating a new plan for Ireland's salvation. For a mind like his, I said, would not stand still and problems such as ours waiting to be solved. You're wrong there. He thinks no more of Ireland, and neither reads nor plans, but knits stockings ever since the wind took his playhouse away. Took his playhouse away? Said several. And why should he be building a playhouse? Somebody asked. And he living in a waste? A queer idea, surely, said another. A playhouse in the waste? Yes, a queer idea, said Pat, but a true one all the same, for I've seen it with my own eyes, or the ruins of it, and not later back than 3 weeks ago, when I was staying with the priest himself. You know the road, all of you, how it straggles from Foxford through the bog, alongside of bog holes deep enough to drown one, and into which the Jarvey and myself seemed in great likelihood of pitching, for the car went down into great ruts, and the horse was shying from one side of the road to the other, and at nothing so far as we could see. There's nothing to be afeared of, your honour. Only once was he near leaving the road the day before Christmas, and I driving the doctor. It was here he saw it, a white thing gliding, and the wheel of the car must have gone within an inch of the bog hole. And the doctor, did he see it? I said. He saw it too, and so scared was he that the hair rose up and went through his cap. Did the Jarvey laugh when he said that? We asked Pat Cromer, and Pat answered, Not he. Them fellows just speak as the words come to them without thinking. Let me get on with my story. We drove on for about a mile, and it was to stop him from clicking his tongue at the horse that I asked him if the bog was Father MacTurnan's parish. Every mile of it, sir, he said, every mile of it. And we do be seeing him buttoned up in his old coat, riding along the roads in his bicycle going to sick calls. Do you often be coming this road? Says I. Oh, not very often, sir. No one lives here except the poor people and the priest and the doctor. Faith, there isn't a poorer parish in Ireland, and every one of them would have been dead long ago if it had not been for Father James. And how does he help them? Isn't he always writing letters to the government asking for relief works? Do you see those bits of roads? Where do those roads lead to? Nowhere. Them roads stops in the middle of the bog when the money's out. But, I said, surely it would be better if the money were spent upon permanent improvements, on drainage, for instance. The Jarvey didn't answer. He called his horse, and not being able to stand the clicking of his tongue, I kept on about the drainage. There's no fall, sir. And the bog is too big, I added, in hope of encouraging conversation. Faith it is, sir. But we aren't very far from the sea, are we? About a couple of miles. Well then, I said, couldn't a harbour be made? They were thinking about that, but there's no depth of water, and everyone's against emigration now. Ah, the harbour would encourage emigration. So it would, your honour. But is there no talk about home industries, weaving, lace-making? I won't say that. But has it been tried? The candle do be burning in the priest's window till 1 in the morning, and he's sitting up thinking of plans to keep the people at home. Now, do you see that house, sir, front my whip at the top of the hill? Well, that's the playhouse he built. A playhouse? Yes, your honour. Father James hoped the people might come from Dublin to see it, for no play like it had ever been acted in Ireland before, sir. And was the play performed? No, your honour. The priest had been learning them all summer, but the autumn was on them before they got it bewrote, and a wind came and blew down one of the walls. And couldn't Father McTurnan get the money to build it up? Sure, he might have got the money, but where'd be the use when there was no luck in it? And who were to act the play? The girls and boys in the parish, and the prettiest girl in all the parish was to play Good Deeds. Oh, so it was a miracle play, I said. You see that man? It's the priest coming out of Tom Burke's cabin, and I warrant he do be bringing him the sacrament, and he having the holy oils with him, for Tom won't pass the day. We had the worst news of him last night. And I can tell you, said Pat Cromer, dropping his story for a moment and looking round the circle, it was a sad story the Jarvey told me. He told it well, for I can see the one-roomed hovel full of peat smoke, the black iron pot with traces of the yellow stirabout in it on the hearth, and the sick man on the pallet bed, and the priest by his side mumbling prayers together. Faith, these Jarvies can tell a story, none better. As well as yourself, Pat, one of us said, and Pat began to tell of the miles of bog on either side of the straggling road, of the hilltop to the left, with the playhouse showing against the dark and changing clouds, of a woman in a red petticoat, a handkerchief tied round her head, who had flung down her spade the moment she caught sight of the car, of the man who appeared on the brow and blew a horn. For she mistook us for bailiffs, said Pat, and 2 little sheep, hardly bigger than geese, were driven away. A playhouse in the waste for these people, I was saying to myself all the time, till my meditations were interrupted by the Jarvey telling that the rocky river we crossed was called the Greyhound, a not inappropriate name, for it ran swiftly. Away down the long road a white cottage appeared, and the Jarvey said to me, "That is the priest's house." It stood on the hillside some little way from the road, and all the way to the door I wondered how his days passed in the great loneliness of the bog. "His Reverence isn't at home yet, your honour. He's gone to attend a sick call." "Yes, I know. Tom Burke." "And is Tom better, Mike?" "The devil a better he be this side of the Jordan," the Jarvey answered, and the housekeeper showed me into the priest's parlour. It was lined with books, and I looked forward to a pleasant chat when we'd finished our business. At that time I was on a relief committee, and the people were starving in the poor parts of the country. "I think he'll be back in about an hour's time, your honour." But the priest seemed to be detained longer than his housekeeper expected, and the moaning of the wind round the cottage reminded me of the small white thing the horse and the doctor had seen gliding along the road. "The priest knows the story. He'll tell me," I said, and piled more turf on the fire. Fine sods of hard black turf they were, and well do I remember seeing them melting away. But all of a sudden my eyes closed. I couldn't have been asleep more than a few minutes, when it seemed to me a great crowd of men and women had gathered about the house, and a moment after the door was flung open, and a tall, gaunt man faced me. "I've just come," he said, "from a deathbed, and they that have followed me aren't far from death if we don't succeed in getting help. I don't know how I can tell you of the crowd I saw round the house that day. We're accustomed to see poor people in towns cowering under arches, but it is more pitiful to see people starving in the fields on the mountainside. I don't know why it should be so, but it is. But I call to mind 2 men in ragged trousers and shirts as ragged, with brown beards on faces yellow with famine, and the words of one of them are not easily forgotten. "The white sun of heaven doesn't shine upon 2 poorer men than upon this man and myself." I can tell you, I didn't envy the priest his job, living all his life in the waste, listening to the tales of starvation, looking into famished faces. There were some women among them, kept back by the men, who wanted to get their word in first. They seemed to like to talk about their misery, and I said, "They're tired of seeing each other. I'm a spectacle, a show, an amusement for them." I don't know if you can catch my meaning. "I think I do," Father James answered, and I asked him to come for a walk up the hill and show me the playhouse. Again he hesitated, and I said, "You must come, Father McTurnan, for a walk. You must forget the misfortunes of those people for a while." He yielded, and we spoke of the excellence of the road under our feet, and he told me that when he conceived the idea of a playhouse, he'd already succeeded in persuading the inspector to agree that the road they were making should go to the top of the hill. "The policy of the government," he said, "from the first, was that relief works should benefit nobody except the workers, and it is sometimes very difficult to think out a project for work that will be perfectly useless. Arches have been built on the top of hills, and roads that lead nowhere. A strange sight to the stranger a road must be that stops suddenly in the middle of a bog. One wonders, at first, how a government could be so foolish. But when one thinks of it, it's easy to understand that the government doesn't wish to spend money on works that will benefit a class. But the road that leads nowhere is difficult to make, even though starving men are employed upon it. For a man to work well, there must be an end in view, and I can tell you it is difficult to bring even starving men to engage on a road that leads nowhere. If I told everything I am telling you to the inspector, he wouldn't have agreed to let the road run to the top of the hill. But I said to him, the road leads nowhere. As well let it end at the top of the hill as down in the valley. So I got the money for my road and some money for my playhouse, for of course the playhouse was as useless as the road. A playhouse in the waste can neither interest or benefit anybody. But there was an idea at the back of my mind all the time that when the road and the playhouse were finished, I might be able to induce the government to build a harbour. But the harbour would be of use, I said. Of very little, he answered. For the harbour to be of use, a great deal of dredging would have to be done. And the government needn't undertake the dredging. How very ingenious. I suppose you often come here to read your breviary? During the building of the playhouse, I often used to be up here, and during the rehearsals I was here every day. If there was a rehearsal, I said to myself, there must have been a play. And I affected interest in the grey, shallow sea and the erosion of the low-lying land, a salt marsh filled with pools. I thought once, said the priest, that if the play were a great success, a line of flat-bottomed steamers might be built. Sitting here in the quiet evenings, I said to myself, reading his breviary, dreaming of a line of steamships crowded with visitors, he's been reading about the Oberammergau performances. So that was his game, the road, the playhouse, the harbour. And I agreed with him. that no one would have dared to predict that visitors would have come from all sides of Europe to see a few peasants performing a medical play in the Tyrol. "Come," I said, "into the playhouse, and let me see how you built it." Half a wall and some of the roof had fallen, and the rubble had not been cleared away, and I said, "It'll cost many pounds to repair the damage, but having gone so far, you should give the play a chance." "I don't think it would be advisable," he muttered, half to himself, half to me. As you may well imagine, I was anxious to hear if he had discovered any aptitude for acting among the boys and girls who lived in the cabins. "I think," he answered me, "that the play would have been fairly acted. I think that, with a little practice, we might have done as well as they did at Oberammergau." An odd man, more willing to discuss the play that he had chosen than the talents of those who were going to perform it, and he told me that it had been written in the 14th century in Latin, and that he had translated it into Irish. I asked him if it would have been possible to organize an excursion from Dublin, Oberammergau in the west. "I used to think so, but it is 8 miles from Rathowen, and the road is a bad one, and when they got here there would be no place for them to stay. They would have to go all the way back again, and that would be 16 miles. "Yet you did well, Father James, to build the playhouse, for the people could work better while they thought they were accomplishing something. Let me start a subscription for you in Dublin." "I don't think that it would be possible." "Not for me to get £50? You might get the money, but I don't think we could ever get a performance of the play." "And why not?" I said. "You see, the wind came and blew down the wall. The people are very pious. I think they felt that the time they spent rehearsing might have been better spent. The playhouse disturbed them in their ideas. They hear Mass on Sundays, and there are the sacraments, and they remember they have to die. It used to seem to me a very sad thing to see all the people going to America, the poor Celt disappearing in America, leaving his own country, leaving his language, and very often his religion." "And does it no longer seem to you sad that such a thing should happen?" "No, not if it is the will of God. God has specially chosen the Irish race to convert the world. No race has provided so many missionaries. No race has preached the gospel more frequently to the heathen. And once we realize that we have to die, and very soon, and that the Catholic Church is the only true church, our ideas about race and nationality fade from us. We are here not to make life successful and triumphant, but to gain heaven. That is the truth. And it is to the honor of the Irish people that they have been selected by God to preach the truth, even though they lose their nationality in preaching it. I do not expect you to accept these opinions. I know that you think very differently, but living here, I have learned to acquiesce in the will of God." He stopped speaking suddenly, like one ashamed of having expressed himself too openly, and soon after we were met by a number of peasants, and the priest's attention was engaged. The inspector of the relief works had to speak to him, and I didn't see him again until dinner time. "You have given them hope," he said. This was gratifying to hear, and the priest sat listening while I told him of the looms already established in different parts of the country. We talked about half an hour, and then, like one who suddenly remembers, the priest got up and fetched his knitting. "Do you knit every evening?" "I have got into the way of knitting lately. It passes the time." "But do you never read?" I asked, and my eyes went towards the bookshelves. "I used to read a great deal, but there wasn't a woman in the parish that could turn a heel properly, so I had to learn to knit. Do you like knitting better than reading? I asked, feeling ashamed of my curiosity. I have constantly to attend sick calls, and if one is absorbed in a book, one doesn't like to put it aside. I see you have 2 volumes of medical plays. Yes, and that's another danger. A book begets all kinds of ideas and notions into one's head. The idea of that playhouse came out of those books. But, I said, you don't think that God sent the storm because he didn't wish a play to be performed? One cannot judge God's designs. Whether God sent the storm or whether it was an accident must remain a matter for conjecture. But it is not a matter of conjecture that one is doing certain good by devoting oneself to one's daily task, getting the government to start new relief works, establishing schools for weaving. The people are entirely dependent upon me, and when I'm attending to their wants, I know I'm doing right. The playhouse interested me more than the priest's ideas of right and wrong, and I tried to get him back to it. But the subject seemed a painful one, and I said to myself, the Jarvey will tell me all about it tomorrow. I can rely on him to find out the whole story from the housekeeper in the kitchen. And sure enough, we hadn't got to the Greyhound River before he was leaning across the well of the car, talking to me and asking if the priest was thinking of putting up the wall of the playhouse. The wall of the playhouse? I said. Yes, your honour. Didn't I see both of you going up the hill in the evening time? I don't think we shall ever see a play in the playhouse. Why would we, since it was God that sent the wind that blew it down? How do you know it was God who sent the wind? It might have been the devil himself, or somebody's curse. Sure, it is of Mrs. Sheridan you do be thinking, your honour, and of her daughter. She that was to be playing good deeds in the play, your honour. And wasn't she wake, coming home from the learning of the play? And when the signs of her weakness began to show, the widow Sheridan took a halter off the cow and tied Margaret to the wall, and she was in the stable till the child was born. And didn't her mother take a bit of string and tie it round the child's throat and bury it near the playhouse? And it was 3 nights after that the storm rose, and the child pulled the thatch out of the roof. But did she murder the child? Sorrow one of me knows. She sent for the priest when she was dying, and told him what she had done. But the priest wouldn't tell what he heard in the confessional, I said. Mrs. Sheridan didn't die that night, not till the end of the week, and the neighbours heard her talking of the child she had buried, and then they all knew what the white thing was they had seen by the roadside. The night the priest left her, he saw the white thing standing in front of him, and if he hadn't been a priest, he'd have dropped down dead. So he took some water from the bog hole and dashed it over it, saying, I baptize thee in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. The driver told his story like one saying his prayers, and he seemed to have forgotten that he had a listener. It must have been a great shock to the priest. Faith it was, sir, to meet an unbaptized child on the roadside, and that child the only bastard that was ever born in the parish. So Tom Mulhare says, and he's the oldest man in the county. It was altogether a very queer idea, this playhouse. It was indeed, sir, a queer idea. But you see, he's a queer man. He has been always thinking of something to do good, and it is said that he thinks too much. Father James, is a very queer man, your honour.
Father Meuron's Tale by R.H. Benson. Father Meuron was very voluble at supper on the Saturday. He exclaimed, he threw out his hands, his bright black eyes shone above his rosy cheeks, and his hair appeared to stand on end. He sat at the farther side of the horseshoe table, and I was able to remark on his gaiety to the English priest who sat beside me. Father Brent smiled. "He's drunk with La Gloire," he said. "He is to tell the story tonight." And this explained everything. I didn't look forward to his recital. I was confident that it would be full of tinsel and swooning maidens who ended their days in convents under Father Meuron's spiritual direction. In fact, I was totally unprepared for the character of his narrative. When we'd all taken our places, the Frenchman began. He told his story in his own language, but I am venturing to render it in English. "My contribution to the histories," he began, "is an affair of exorcism. That is a matter with which we in Europe are not familiar in these days. It would seem that grace has a certain power, accumulating through the centuries, of saturating even physical objects with its force. However men may rebel, yet the sacrifices offered and the prayers poured out have a faculty of holding Satan in check and preventing his more formidable manifestations. Even in my own poor country at this hour, in spite even of the deliberate worship of Satan, yet grace is in the air, and it is seldom indeed that a priest has to deal with a case of possession. In your respectable England, too, it is the same. The simple piety of Protestants has kept alive to some extent the force of the gospel. Here, in this country, it is somewhat different. The old powers have survived the Christian assault, and while they cannot live in Holy Rome, there are corners where they do so. However, my recital does not concern this continent, but the little island of La Soufrière. Their circumstances are other than here. It was a stronghold of darkness when I was there in 91. Grace, while laying hold of men's hearts, had not yet penetrated the lower creation. Do you understand me? There were many holy persons who frequented the sacraments and lived devoutly, but there were many of another manner. The ancient rites survived secretly, and darkness made itself visible. It was in 91, he repeated, that I went there with another of our fathers to the mission house. I was astonished by much that I saw. Never until that time had I seen the power of the sacraments so evident. In civilized lands, as I've suggested to you, the air is charged with grace. He who is without God's favour is not without his grace at each breath he draws. There are churches, religious, pious persons about him. There are centuries of prayers behind him. But there, in La Soufrière, all is either divine or satanic, black or white, Christian or devilish. I've seen holy catechumens foam at the mouth and roll their eyes in pain as the saving water fell on them, and that which was within went out. As the Gospel relates, Spiritus conturbavit illum, et lisus in terram volutabatur spumans. Father Meuron paused again. More than one missionary had told me the same thing, and I had found in their tales a parallel to those related by the first preachers in the early days of the Church. I was incredulous at first, continued the priest, until I saw these things for myself. An old father of our mission rebuked me for it. "You are an ignorant fellow," he said. "Your airs are still of the seminary." And what he said was just, my friends. On one Monday morning, as we met for our council, I could see that this old priest had something to say. Monsieur Lasserre was his name. He kept very silent until the little businesses had been accomplished, and then he turned to the Father Rector. "Monseigneur has written," he said, "and given me the necessary permission for the matter you know, and he bids me take another priest with me, I ask that Father Miron may accompany me. He needs a lesson, this zealous young missionary." The Father Rector smiled at me as I sat astonished, and nodded at Father Lasserre to give permission. "Father Lasserre will explain to you," he said. It appeared that there was a matter of exorcism on hand. A woman who lived with her mother and husband had been afflicted by the devil, Father Lasserre said. She was a catechumen, and had been devout for several months, and all seemed well, until this. The assault had been made on her soul. Father Lasserre had visited the woman and examined her, and had made his report to the bishop, asking permission to exorcise the creature. I did not venture to tell the priest that he was mistaken, and that the affair was one of epilepsy. I had studied a little in books for my medical training, and all that I heard now seemed to confirm the diagnosis. There were the symptoms, easy to read. What would you have? The priest again made his little gesture. I knew more in my youth than all the fathers of the church. Their affairs of devils were nothing but an affection of the brain, dreams and fancies. He laughed with a fierce irony. You know it all, gentlemen. I had lost all desire to sleep now. The French priest was more interesting than I had thought. His elaborateness seemed dissipated, and I began to wonder how his change of mind had been wrought. We set out that afternoon, he continued. The woman lived on the farther side of the island, perhaps a couple of hours' travel, for it was rough going, and as we went up over the path, Father Lasserre told me more. It seemed that the woman blasphemed. The subconscious self, said I to myself, as Monsieur Charcot has explained. It is her old habit reasserting itself. She foamed and rolled her eyes. Affection of the brain, said I. She feared holy water. They dared not throw it on her. Her struggles were so fierce. Because she has been taught to fear it, said I. And so the good father talked, eyeing me now and again, and I smiled in my heart, knowing that he was a simple old fellow who had not studied the new books. She was quieter after sunset, he told me, and would take a little food then. Her fits came on her for the most part at midday, and I smiled again at that. Why it should be so, I knew. The heat affected her. She would be quieter, science would tell us, when evening fell. If it were the power of Satan that held her, she would surely rage more in the darkness than in the light. The Scripture tells us so. I said something of this to Father Lasserre as if it were a question, and he looked at me. Perhaps, brother, he said, she is more at ease in the darkness and fears the light, and that she is quieter, therefore, when the sun sets. Again I smiled to myself. What piety, said I, and what foolishness. The house where the three lived stood apart from any others. It was an old shed into which they had moved a week before, for the neighbours could no longer bear the woman's screaming, and we came to it towards sunset. It was a heavy evening, dull and thick, and as we pushed down the path I saw the smoking mountain high on the left hand between the tangled trees. There was a great silence around us, and no wind, and every leaf against the angry sky was as if cut of steel. We saw the roof below us presently, and a little smoke escaped from a hole. "We will sit here a little, brother," said my friend. "We will not enter till sunset." And he took out his office book and began to say his matins and lauds, sitting on a fallen tree trunk by the side of the path. All was very silent about us. I suffered terrible distraction, for I was a young man and excited, and though I knew it was no more than epilepsy that I was to see, yet epilepsy is not a good sight. But I was finishing the first nocturne when I saw that Father Lasserre was looking off his book. We were sitting 30 yards from the roof of the hut, which was built in a scoop of the ground, so that the roof was level with the ground on which we sat. Below it was a little open space, flat, perhaps 20 yards across, and below that, yet farther, was the wood again, and far over that was the smoke of the village against the sea. There was the mouth of a well with a bucket beside it, and by this was standing a man, a negro, very upright, with a vessel in his hand. This fellow turned as I looked, and saw us there, and he dropped the vessel, and I could see his white teeth. Father Lasserre stood up and laid his finger on his lips, nodded once or twice, pointed to the west, where the sun was just above the horizon, and the fellow nodded to us again and stooped for his vessel. He filled it from the bucket and went back into the house. I looked at Father Lasserre, and he looked at me. "In 5 minutes," he said. "That is the husband. Did you not see his wounds?" "I'd seen no more than his teeth," I said, and my friend nodded again and proceeded to finish his nocturne. Again Father Meuron paused dramatically. His ruddy face seemed a little pale in the candlelight. Plainly something was coming soon. He flashed his eyes around the circle, clasped his hands, and continued. "When the sun showed only a red rim above the sea, we went down to the house. The path ran on high ground to the roof, and then dipped down the edge of the cutting past the window to the front of the shed. I looked through this window sideways as I went after Father Lasserre, who was carrying his bag with the book and the holy water, but I could see nothing but the light of the fire, and there was no sound. The door was closed as we came to it, and as Father Lasserre lifted his hand to knock, there was the howl of a beast from within. He knocked and looked at me. "It is but epilepsy," he said, and his lips wrinkled as he said it. The priest stopped again and smiled ironically at us all. "I will not tell you all that I saw," he went on, "when the candle was lighted and set on the table, but only a little. You would not dream well, my friends, as I did not that night. But the woman sat in a corner by the fireplace, bound with cords by her arms to the back of the chair, and her feet to the legs of it. The gentleman, she was like no woman at all. A howl of a wolf came from her lips, but there were words in the howl. At first I could not understand, till she began in French, and then I understood. My God! The foam dripped from her mouth like water, and her eyes began to shake when I saw them, until the holy water was spilt on the floor, and I set it down on the table by the candles. There was a plate of meat on the table, a roasted mutton, I think, and a loaf of bread beside it. Remember that, gentlemen, that mutton and bread. And as I stood there, I told myself, like making acts of faith, that it was but epilepsy, or at the most madness. My friends, it is probable that few of you know the form of exorcism. It is neither in the ritual nor the pontifical, and I cannot remember it all myself, but it began thus. The Frenchman sprang up, and stood with his back to the fire, with his face in the shadow. Father Lasserre was here, where I stand, in his cotter and stole, and I beside him. There, where my chair stands, was the square table, as near as that, with the bread and meat and the holy water and the candle. Beyond the table was the woman. Her husband stood beside her on the left hand, and the old mother was there. He flung out a hand to the right, on the floor, telling her beads and weeping. But weeping. When the father was ready and had said a word to the others, he signed to me to lift the holy water again. She was quiet at the moment, and then he sprinkled her. As he lifted his hand, she raised her eyes, and there was a look in them of terror, as if at a blow. And as the drops fell, she leapt forward in her chair, and the chair leapt with her. Her husband was at her and dragged the chair back, but my God, it was terrible to see him. His teeth shone as if he smiled, but the tears ran down his face. Then she moaned, like a child in pain. It was as if the holy water burnt her. She lifted her face to her man, as if she begged him to wipe up the drops. And all the while I still told myself that it was the terror of her mind only at the holy water, that it could not be that she was possessed by Satan. It was but madness and epilepsy. Father Lasserre went on with the prayers, and I said Amen, and there was a psalm, Deus in nomine tuo salvum me fac, and then came the first bidding to the unclean spirit to go out in the name of the mysteries of the Incarnation and Passion. Gentlemen, I swear to you that something happened then, but I do not know what. A confusion fell on me, and a kind of darkness. I saw nothing. It was as if I were dead. The priest lifted a shaking hand to wipe the sweat from his forehead. There was a profound silence in the room. Then, when I knew where I was, Father Lasserre was reading out of the Gospels how our Lord gave authority to his church to cast out unclean spirits, and all the while his voice never trembled. "And the woman?" said a voice hoarsely from Father Brent's chair. "Ah, the woman. My God, I do not know. I did not look at her. I stared at the plate on the table, but at least she was not crying out now. When the scripture was finished, Father Lasserre gave me the book. "Ah, Father," he said, "it is but epilepsy, is it not?" Then he beckoned me, and I went with him holding the book till we were within a yard of the woman. But I could not hold the book still. It shook. It shook. Father Meuron thrust out his hand. It shook like that, gentlemen. He took the book from me, sharply and angrily. "Go back, sir," he said, and he thrust the book into the husband's hand. "There," he said. I went back behind the table and leant on it. Then Father Lasserre— oh, my God, the courage of this man! He set his hands on the woman's head. She writhed up her teeth to bite, but he was too strong for her, and then he cried out from the book the second bidding to the unclean spirit. "Ecce crucum Domini, behold the cross of the Lord, flee ye adverse hosts, the Lion of the tribe of Judah has prevailed." Gentlemen, the Frenchman flung out his hands, I who stand here tell you that something happened, God knows what. I only know this, that as the woman cried out and scrambled with her feet on the floor, the flame of the candle became smoke-coloured for one instant. I told myself it was the dust. Yes, gentlemen, as you tell yourselves now. Ha! It is but epilepsy. Is it not so, sir? The old rector leant forward with a deprecating hand, but the Frenchman glared and gesticulated. There was a murmur from the room. Then there was a prayer. I heard Oremus, but I did not dare to look at the woman. I fixed my eyes so on the bread and the meat. It was the one clean thing in that terrible room. I whispered to myself, bread and mutton, bread and mutton. I thought of the refectory at home, anything familiar to quiet myself. Then there was the third exorcism. I saw the Frenchman's hands rise and fall, clenched, and his teeth close on his lips. Gentlemen, I swear to you by God Almighty that this was what I saw. I kept my eyes on the bread and meat. It lay there, beneath my eyes, and yet I saw too the good Father Lasserre lean forward to the woman again, and heard him begin, Exorcise te. And then this happened. This happened. The bread and the meat corrupted themselves to worms before my eyes. Father Meuron dashed forward, turned round, and dropped into his chair as the two English priests sprang to their feet. In a few minutes he was able to tell us that all had ended well, that the woman had been presently found in her right mind, and that the apparent paroxysm of nature that had accompanied the words of the third exorcism had passed away as suddenly as it had come. Then we went to night prayers and fortified ourselves against the dark.
The Devil and the Cat by James Joyce. Beaugency is a tiny old town on a bank of the Loire, France's longest river. It's also a very wide river, for France at least. At Beaugency it's so wide that if you wanted to cross it from one bank to the other, you would have to take at least 1,000 steps. Long ago, the people of Beaugency, when they wanted to cross it, had to go in a boat, for there was no bridge, and they couldn't make one for themselves or pay anyone else to make one, so what were they to do? The devil, who was always reading the newspapers, heard about this sad state of theirs, so he dressed himself and came to call on the Lord Mayor of Beaugency, who was named Monsieur Alfred Byrne. This Lord Mayor was very fond of dressing himself, too. He wore a scarlet robe and always had a great golden chain around his neck, even when he was fast asleep in bed with his knees in his mouth. The devil told the Lord Mayor what he had read in the newspaper and said he could make a bridge for the people of Beaugency so that they could cross the river as often as they wished. He said he could make as good a bridge as ever was made, and make it in one single night. The Lord Mayor asked him how much money he wanted for making such a bridge. "No money at all," said the devil. "All I ask is that the first person who crosses the bridge shall belong to me." "Good," said the Lord Mayor. Night came down, all the people at Beaugency went to bed and slept. The morning came, and when they put their heads out of their windows they cried, "Oh, wow, what a fine bridge!" For they saw a fine, strong stone bridge thrown across the wide river. All the people ran down to the head of the bridge and looked across it. There was the devil, standing at the other side of the bridge, waiting for the first person who should cross it. But nobody dared to cross it for fear of the devil. Then there was the sound of bugles. That was a sign for the people to be silent, and the Lord Mayor, Monsieur Alfred Byrne, appeared in his great scarlet robe and wearing his heavy golden chain around his neck. He had a bucket of water in one hand, and under his arm, the other arm, he carried a cat. The devil stopped dancing when he saw him from the other side of the bridge, and put up his long spyglass. All the people whispered to one another, and the cat looked up at the Lord Mayor, because in the town of Beaugency it was allowed that a cat should look at a Lord Mayor. When he was tired of looking at the Lord Mayor, because even the cat gets tired of looking at a Lord Mayor, he began to play with the Lord Mayor's heavy golden chain. When the Lord Mayor came to the head of the bridge, every man held his breath, and every woman held her tongue. The Lord Mayor put the cat down on the bridge, and quick as a thought, splash, he emptied the whole bucket of water over it. The cat, who was now between the devil and the bucket of water, made up his mind quite as quickly, and ran with his ears back across the bridge and into the devil's arms. The devil was as angry as the devil himself. "Monsieur les Bagentiens!" he shouted across the bridge. "Vous n'êtes pas de belles gens du tout! Vous n'êtes que de chats!" And he said to the cat, "Viens ici, mon petit chat. Tu as peur, mon petit chouchat? Tu as froid, mon pauvre petit chouchat? Viens ici, le diable t'emporte. On va se chauffer tous les deux." And off he went with the cat. And since that time the people of that town are called les chats de Beaugency. P.S. The devil mostly speaks a language of his own called Belcebabble, which he makes up himself as he goes along. But when he is very angry he can speak quite bad French very well, though some who have heard him say that he has a strong Dublin accent.
The Brownie of the Black Hags, by James Hogg. When the Sprots were lairds of Wheelhope, which is now a long time ago, there was one of the ladies who was very badly spoken of in the country. People did not just openly assert that Lady Wheelhope was a witch, but everyone had an aversion even at hearing her named, and when by chance she happened to be mentioned, old men would shake their heads and say, "Ah, let us arraign her. The less you meddle with her, the better." Old wives would give over spinning, and, as a pretence for hearing what might be said about her, poke in the fire with the tongs, cocking up their ears all the while. And then, after some meaning coughs, hems, and haws, would haply say, "Hech, wowsers, and I be true that's said," or something equally wise and decisive as that. In short, Lady Wheelhope was accounted a very bad woman. She was an inexorable tyrant in her family, quarrelled with her servants, often cursing them, striking them, and turning them away, especially if they were religious. For these she could not endure, but suspected them of everything bad. Whenever she found out any of the servant men of the laird's establishment for religious characters, she soon gave them up to the military and got them shot. and several girls that were regular in their devotions she was supposed to have popped off with poison. She was certainly a wicked woman, else many good people were mistaken in her character, and the poor persecuted Covenanters were obliged to unite in their prayers against her. As for the laird, he was a stump, a big, dun-faced, fluffy body that cared neither for good nor evil, and did not well know the one from the other. He laughed at his lady's tantrums and barleyhoods, and the greater the rage that she got into, the laird thought it the better sport. One day, when 2 servant-maids came running to him in great agitation, and told him that his lady had felled one of the companions, the laird laughed heartily at them, and said he did not doubt it. "Why, sir, how can you laugh?" said they. "The poor girl is killed." Very likely, said the laird. "Well, it will teach her to take care who she angers again." "And, sir, your lady will be hanged." "Very likely. Well, it will learn her how to strike so rashly again. Will it not, Jessie?" But when this same Jessie died suddenly one morning, the laird was greatly confounded. There was little doubt that she was taken off by poison, but whether the lady did it through jealousy or not was never divulged. But it greatly bamboozled and astonished the poor laird, for his nerves failed him, and his whole frame became paralytic. He seems to have been exactly in the same state of mind with a collie that I once had. He was extremely fond of the gun as long as I did not kill anything with her, there being no game laws in Ettrick Forest in those days, and he got a grand chase after the hares when I missed them. But there was one day that I chanced for a marvel to shoot one dead a few paces before his nose. I'll never forget the astonishment that the poor beast manifested. He stared one while at the gun, and another while at the dead hare, and seemed to be drawing the conclusion that if the case stood thus, there was no creature sure of its life. Finally, he took his tail between his legs and ran away home, and never would face a gun all his life again. So was it precisely with Laird Sprott of Wheelhope. As long as his lady's wrath produced only noise and splutter among the servants, he thought it a fine sport. But when he saw what he believed the dreadful effects of it, he became like a barrel organ out of tune, and could only discourse one note, which he did to every one he met. "I wish she mun ha' gotten something she's been the war of." This note he repeated early and late, night and day, sleeping and waking, alone and in company, from the moment that Jessie died till she was buried. And on going to the churchyard as chief mourner, he whispered it to her relations by the way. When they came to the grave, he took his stand at the head, nor would he give place to the girl's father, but there he stood, like a huge post, as though he neither saw nor heard. And when he had lowered her late, comely head into the grave, and dropped the cord, he slowly lifted his hat with one hand, wiped his dim eyes with the back of the other, and said in a deep, tremulous tone, "Poor lassie, I wish she didna get something she had been the war of." This death made a great noise among the common people, but there was no protection for the life of the subject in those days, and provided a man or woman was a true loyal subject and a real anti-Covenanter, any of them might kill as many as they liked. So there was no one to take cognizance of the circumstances relating to the death of poor Jessie. After this, the lady walked softly for the space of 2 or 3 years. She saw that she had rendered herself odious, and had entirely lost her husband's countenance, which she liked worst of all. But the evil propensity could not be overcome, and a poor boy, whom the laird, out of sheer compassion, had taken into his service, being found dead one morning, the country people could no longer be restrained, so they went in a body to the sheriff, and insisted on an investigation. It was proved that she detested the boy, had often threatened him, and had given him brose and butter the afternoon before he died. But the cause was ultimately dismissed, and the pursuers fined. No one can tell to what height of wickedness she might now have proceeded, had not a check of a very singular kind been laid upon her. Among the servants that came home at the next term was one who called himself Meredith, and a strange person he was. He had the form of a boy, but the features of one 100 years old, save that his eyes had a strong resemblance to the eyes of a well-known species of monkey. He was froward and perverse in all his actions, and disregarded the pleasure or displeasure of any person, but he performed his work well and with apparent ease. From the moment that he entered the house, the lady conceived a mortal antipathy against him, and besought the laird to turn him away. But the laird of himself never turned away anybody, and moreover he had hired him for a trivial wage, and the fellow neither wanted activity nor perseverance. The natural consequence of this arrangement was that the lady instantly set herself to make Meredith's life as bitter as it was possible, in order to get early quit of a domestic every way so disgusting. Her hatred of him was not like a common antipathy entertained by one human being against another. She hated him as one might hate a toad or an adder, and his occupation of jottery-man, as the laird termed his servant of all work, keeping him always about her hand, it must have proved highly disagreeable. She scolded him, she raged at him, but he only mocked her wrath, and giggled and laughed at her with the most provoking derision. She tried to fell him again and again, but never, with all her address, could she hit him, and never did she make a blow at him that she did not repent it. She was heavy and unwieldy, and he as quick in his motions as a monkey. Besides, he generally had her in such an ungovernable rage that when she flew at him she hardly knew what she was doing. At one time she guided her blow towards him, and he at the same instant avoided it with such dexterity that she knocked down the chief hind, or foresman, and then Meredith giggled so heartily that, lifting the kitchen poker, she threw it at him with a full design of knocking out his brains, but the missile only broke every plate and ashet on the kitchen dresser. She then hastened to the laird, crying bitterly, and telling him she would not suffer that wretch Meredith, as she called him, to stay another night in the family. "Why, then, put him away, and trouble me no more about him," said the laird. "Put him away!" exclaimed she. "I have already ordered him away 100 times, and charged him never to let me see his horrible face again, but he only flouts me, and tells me he'll see me at the devil first." The pertinacity of the fellow amused the laird exceedingly. His dim eyes turned upwards into his head with delight. He then looked 2 ways at once, turned round his back, and laughed till the tears ran down his dun cheeks, but he could only articulate, "You're fitted now." The lady's agony of rage still increasing from this derision, she flew on the laird, and said he was not worthy the name of a man if he did not turn away that pestilence after the way he had abused her. "Why, Shussie, my dear, what has he done to you?" "What done to me? Has he not caused me to knock down John Thompson, and I do not know if ever he will come to life again." "Have you felled your favourite, John Thompson?" said the laird, laughing more heartily than before. "You might have done a worse deed than that. But what evil had John done?" "And has he not broke every plate and dish on the whole dresser?" continued the lady, disregarding the laird's question. "And for all this devastation he only mocks at my displeasure, absolutely mocks me, and if you do not have him turned away and hanged or shot for his deeds, you are not worthy the name of man." "Ho, ho, ho, alack, what a devastation among the china metal!" said the laird, and, calling on Meredith, he said, "Tell me, thou evil Meredith of Babylon, how thou darest knock down thy lady's favourite servant, John Thompson." "Not I, your honour. It was my lady herself who got into such a furious rage at me that she mistook her man and felled Mr. Thompson, and the good man's skull is fractured." "That was very odd," said the laird, chuckling. "I do not comprehend it. But then, what the devil set you on smashing all my lady's delft and chinaware? That was a most infamous and provoking action."
It was she herself, your honour. Sorry would I have been to have broken one dish belonging to the house. I take all the house servants to witness that my lady smashed all the dishes with a poker, and now lays the blame on me." The laird turned his dim and delighted eyes on his lady, who was crying with vexation and rage, and seemed meditating another personal attack on the culprit, which he did not at all appear to shun, but rather encourage. She, however, vented her wrath in threatenings of the most deep and desperate revenge, the creature all the while assuring her that she would be foiled, and that in all her encounters and contests with him she would uniformly come to the worst. He was resolved to do his duty, and there before his master he defied her. The laird thought more than he considered it prudent to reveal, but he had little doubt that his wife would wreak that vengeance on his Josherryman which she avowed, and as little of her capability. He almost shuddered when he recollected one who had taken something that she had been the ware of. In a word, the Lady of Wheelhope's inveterate malignity against this one object was like the rod of Moses that swallowed up the rest of the serpents. All her wicked and evil propensities seemed to be superseded by it, if not utterly absorbed in its virtues. The rest of the family now lived in comparative peace and quietness, for early and late her malevolence was venting itself against the Jotteryman, and him alone. It was a delirium of hatred and vengeance, on which the whole bent and bias of her inclination was set. She could not stay from the creature's presence, for in the intervals when absent from him she spent her breath in curses and execrations, and then, not able to rest, she ran again to seek him, her eyes gleaming with the anticipated delights of vengeance, while ever and anon all the scathe, the ridicule, and the harm redounded on herself. Was it not strange that she could not get quit of this sole annoyance of her life? One would have thought she easily might. But by this time there was nothing further from her intention. She wanted vengeance, full, adequate, and delicious vengeance on her audacious opponent. But he was a strange and terrible creature, and the means of retaliation came always, as it were, to his hand. Bread and sweet milk was the only fare that Meredith cared for, and he, having bargained for that, would not want it, though he often got it with a curse and with ill will. The lady having intentionally kept back his wonted allowance for some days, on the Sabbath morning following she set him down a bowl of rich sweet milk, well drugged with a deadly poison, and then she lingered in a little ante-room to watch the success of her grand plot, and prevent any other creature from tasting of the potion. Meredith came in, and the housemaid says to him, "There is your breakfast, creature." "Oh, ho! My lady has been liberal this morning," said he, "but I am beforehand with her. Here, little missy, you seem very hungry today. Take you my breakfast." And with that he set the beverage down to the lady's little favourite spaniel. It so happened that the lady's only son came at that instant into the ante-room seeking her, and teasing his mamma about something which took her attention from the hall table for a space. When she looked again, and saw Missy lapping up the sweet milk, she burst from her lobby like a dragon, screaming as if her head had been on fire, kicked the bowl and the remainder of its contents against the wall, and, lifting Missy in her bosom, she retreated hastily, crying all the way. "Ha, ha, ha! I have you now!" cried Meredith, as she vanished from the hall. Poor Missy died immediately, and very privately. Indeed, she would have died and been buried, and never one have seen her save her mistress, had not Meredith, by a luck that never failed him, popped his nose over the flower-garden wall, just as his lady was laying her favourite in a grave of her own digging. She, not perceiving her tormentor, plied on at her task, apostrophizing the insensate little carcass.
Ah, poor dear little creature, thou hast had a hard fortune, and hast drank of the bitter potion that was not intended for thee. But he shall drink it 3 times double for thy sake. Is that little missy? Said the eldritch voice of the Jotterman, close at the lady's ear. She uttered a loud scream and sunk down on the bank. Alack for poor little missy, continued the creature in a tone of mockery. My heart is sorry for missy. What has befallen her? Whose breakfast cup did she drink? Hence with thee, thou fiend! Cried the lady. What right hast thou to intrude on thy mistress's privacy? Thy turn is coming yet, or may the nature of woman change within me. It is changed already, said the creature, grinning with delight. I have thee now, I have thee now. And were it not to show my superiority over thee, which I do every hour, I should soon see thee strapped like a mud cat, or a worrying bratch. What wilt thou try next? I will cut thy throat, and if I die for it, will rejoice in the deed, a deed of charity to all that dwell on the face of the earth. Go about thy business. I have warned thee before, dame, and now I warn thee again, that all thy mischief meditated against me will fall double on thine own head. I want none of your warning, and none of your instructions, fiendish cur. Hence with your elvish face, and take care of yourself. It would be too disgusting and horrible to relate or read all the incidents that fell out between this unaccountable couple. Their enmity against each other had no end and no mitigation, and scarcely a single day passed over on which her acts of malevolent ingenuity did not terminate fatally for some favourite thing of the lady's, while all these doing never failed to appear as her own act. Scarcely was there a thing, animate or inanimate, on which she set a value, left to her that was not destroyed, and yet scarcely 1 hour or minute could she remain absent from her tormentor, and all the while, it seems, solely for the purpose of tormenting him. But while all the rest of the establishment enjoyed peace and quietness from the fury of their termagant dame, matters still grew worse and worse between the fascinated pair. The lady haunted the menial in the same manner as the raven haunts the eagle, for a perpetual quarrel, though the former knows that in every encounter she is to come off the loser. But now noises were heard on the stairs by night, and it was whispered among the menials that the lady had been seeking Meredith's bed by night, on some horrible intent. Several of them would have sworn that they had seen her passing and repassing on the stair after midnight, when all was quiet. But then it was likewise well known that Meredith slept with well-fastened doors, and a companion in another bed in the same room, whose bed, too, was nearest the door. Nobody cared much what became of the Jotterman, for he was an unsocial and disagreeable person, but someone told him what they had seen, and hinted a suspicion of the lady's intent. But the creature only bit his upper lip, winked with his eyes, and said, She had better let alone. She will be the first to rue that. Not long after this, to the horror of the family and the whole countryside, the laird's only son was found murdered in his bed one morning, under circumstances that manifested the most fiendish cruelty and inveteracy on the part of his destroyer. As soon as the atrocious act was divulged, the lady fell into convulsions and lost her reason, and happy had it been for her had she never recovered either the use of reason or her corporeal functions any more, for there was blood upon her hand, which she took no care to conceal, and there was too little doubt that it was the blood of her own innocent and beloved boy, the sole heir and hope of the family. This blow deprived the laird of all power of action, but the lady had a brother, a man of the law, who came and instantly proceeded to an investigation of this unaccountable murder. But before the sheriff arrived, the housekeeper took the lady's brother aside, and told him he had better not go on with the scrutiny, for she was sure the crime would be brought home to her unfortunate mistress. And after examining into several corroborative circumstances, and viewing the state of the raving maniac, with the blood on her hand and arm, he made the investigation a very short one, declaring the domestics all exculpated. The laird attended his boy's funeral, and laid his head in the grave, but appeared exactly like a man walking in a trance, an automaton, without feelings or sensations, oftentimes gazing at the funeral procession as on something he could not comprehend. And when the death-bell of the parish church fell a-tolling, as the corpse approached the kirk stile, he cast a dim eye up towards the belfry, and said hastily, What's that? Och, aye, we're just in time, just in time. And often was he hammering over the name of evil Meredith, king of Babylon, to himself. He seemed to have some far-fetched conception that his unaccountable jottelyman had a hand in the death of his only son, and other lesser calamities, although the evidence in favour of Meredith's innocence was, as usual, quite decisive. This grievous mistake of Lady Wheelhope, for every landward laird's wife was then styled lady, can only be accounted for by supposing her in a state of derangement, or rather under some evil influence over which she had no control, and to a person in such a state the mistake was not so very unnatural. The mansion-house of Wheelhope was old and irregular. The stair had 4 acute turns, all the same, and 4 landings placed, all the same. In the uppermost chamber slept the 2 domestics, Meredith in the bed furthest in, and in the chamber immediately below that, which was exactly similar, slept the young laird and his tutor, the former in the bed furthest in, and thus, in the turmoil of raging passions, her own hand made herself childless. Meredith was expelled the family forthwith, but refused to accept of his wages, which the man of the law pressed upon him, for fear of further mischief, but he went away in apparent sullenness and discontent, no one knowing whither. When his dismissal was announced to the lady, who was watched day and night in her chamber, the news had such an effect on her that her whole frame seemed electrified. The horrors of remorse vanished, and another passion, which I neither can comprehend nor define, took sole possession of her distempered spirit. "He must not go! He shall not go!" she exclaimed. "No, no, no! He shall not! He shall not! He shall not!" And then she instantly set herself about making ready to follow him, uttering all the while the most diabolical expressions, indicative of anticipated vengeance. "Oh, could I but snap his nerves one by one, and burrow among his vitals, could I but slice his heart off piecemeal in small messes, and see his blood lopper and bubble, and spin away in purple sleighs, and then to see him grin and grin and grin and grin, oh, 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 how beautiful and grand a sight it would be to see him grin and grin and grin!" And in such a style would she run on for hours together. She thought of nothing, she spoke of nothing but the discarded jottelyman, whom most people now began to regard as a creature that was not canny. They had seen him eat and drink and work like other people, still he had that about him that was not like other men. He was a boy in form, and an antediluvian in feature. Some thought he was a mule, between a Jew and an ape, some a wizard, some a kelpie or a fairy, but most of all, that he was really and truly a brownie. What he was I do not know, and therefore will not pretend to say, but be that as it may, in spite of locks and keys, watching and waking, the Lady of Wheelhope soon made her escape and eloped after him. The attendants, indeed, would have made oath that she was carried away by some invisible hand, for that it was impossible she could have escaped on foot like other people, and this edition of the story took in the country. But sensible people viewed the matter in another light. As, for instance, when Watty Blythe, the laird's old shepherd, came in from the hill one morning, his wife Bessie thus accosted him, "His presence be about us. Watty Blythe, have you heard what has happened at the hall? Things are aye turning war and war there, and it looks like as if Providence had gi'n up our laird's house to destruction. This grand estate mun now gang frae the Sprots, for it has finished them." "No, Bessie, it isna the estate that has finished the Sprots, but the Sprots that hae finished it, and themselves into the boot. They have been a wicked and degenerate race, and aye the longer the war, till they hae reached the utmost bounds of earthly wickedness, and it's time the deil were looking after his ain." "Ah, Watty Blythe, ye never said a truer say, and that's just the very point where your story ends and mine commences. For hasna the deil, or the fairies, or the brownies ta'en away our lady bodily, and the hale country is running and riding in search of her, and there is 200 merks offered to the first that can find her and bring her safe back. They hae ta'en her away, skin and bane, body and soul, and a' Watty. Hech, how, but that is awesome. And where is it thocht they hae ta'en her to, Bessie?" "Oh, they hae some guess at that frae her ain hints afore. It is thocht they hae carried her after that Satan of a creature, wha rocht sae muckle way about the house. It is for him they are a' looking, for they ken weel that where they get the ta'en, they will get the tether." "Whew, is that the gate o't, Bessie?" "Why, then, the awfu' story is neither mair nor less than this, that the leddy has made elopement, as they ca' it, and run away after a black-geared jotterinman. How ways me for human frailty, but that's just the gate. When ance the deil gets in the point of his finger, he will soon have in his hale hand. Aye, he wants but a hair to make a tether of ony day. I seen her braw, sonsy lass, but even then I feared she was devoted to destruction, for she aye mockit at religion, Bessie, and that's no a good mark of a young body. And she made its servants her enemies, and think you these good men's prayers were to blow awa the wind, and be nae mair regarded? No, Bessie, my woman, tak ye this mark, baith o' our ain bairns and other folks. If ever ye see a young body that disregards the Sabbath, and makes a mock at the ordinances o' religion, ye will never see that body come to muckle good. A braw hand she had made her jibes and jeers at religion, and her mockeries of the poor persecuted hill-folk, sunk down by degrees into the very dregs of sin and misery, run away after a scullion. Fie, Watty, how can ye say sae? It was weel kenned that ye hated him wi' a perfect and mortal hatred, and tried to mak awa wi' him mae ways nor ane. Ah, Bessie, but nipping and scarting are Scots folks' wooing, and though it is but recht that we suspend our judgments, there will naebody persuade me, if she be found along wi' the creature, but that she has run away after him in the natural way, on her twa shanks, without help either frae fairy or brownie. I'll never believe sic a thing of ony woman born, let be a lady weel up in years. God help ye, Bessie, ye dinna ken the stretch o' corrupt nature. The best o' us, when left to ourselves, are nae better than strayed sheep, that will never find the way back to their ain pastures, and of all things made of mortal flesh, a wicked woman is the worst. Alack a day, we get the blame o' muckle that we little deserve. But, Watty, keep ye a gieing sharp lookout about the close and the caves of our glen, or hope, as ye ca' it, for the lady kens them a' gieing weel, and gin the 200 merks was come our way, it micht gang awa our gate. It would toch her a' our bonny lasses. Aye, weel a wad, Bessie, that's nae lee. And now, when ye bring me a mind o't, the hell forgie me gin I dinna hear a critter up at Brock Holes this morning, skirling as if something were cutting its throat. It gars a' the hair stand on my head when I think it may have been our lady, and the droich of a critter murdering her. I took it for a bottle of wildcats, and wished they might poo out in another's thropples, but when I think on it again, they were unca like some of our lady's unearthly screams. His presence be about us. Watty, haste ye, put on your bonnet, tak your staff in your hand, and gang and see what it is. Shame fa me, if I dare gang, Bessie. Hoot, Watty, trust in the Lord. Oh, weel, say I do. The Dane's no to throw himsel ower a linn and trust that the Lord's to keep him in a blanket. No hing himself up in a rape and expect the Lord to come and cut him down. And it's nae muckle safer for an auld stiff man to gang away out to a wild remote place where there is aebody murdering another. What is that I hear, Bessie? Haud the lang tongue o' ye and run to the door and see what noise that is.
Bessie ran to the door, but soon returned an altered creature, with her mouth wide open and her eyes set in her head.
"It is them, Watty, it is them. His presence be about us. What will we do?" "Them? What'n them?" "Why, that blackguard creature coming here, leading our lady by the hair of the head, and yerking her with a stick. I am terrified out of my wits. What will we do?"
"We'll see what they say," said Watty, manifestly in as great terror as his wife, and by natural impulse, or as a last resource, he opened the Bible, not knowing what he did, and then hurried on his spectacles. But before he got 2 leaves turned over, the 2 entered, a frightful-looking couple indeed. Meredith, with his old withered face and ferret eyes, leading the Lady of Wheelhope by the long hair, which was mixed with grey, and whose face was all bloated with wounds and bruises, and having stripes of blood on her garments.
"Who's this? Who's this, sirs?"
said Watty Blythe.
"Close that book, and I will tell you, good man," said Meredith.
"I can hear what ye hae to say with the book open, sir," said Watty, turning over the leaves as if looking for some particular passage, but apparently not knowing what he was doing.
"It's a shameful business, this, but some will hae to answer for't. My lady, I am unca grieved to see you in sic a plight. Ye hae surely been doomed sair left to yoursel."
The lady shook her head, uttered a feeble, hollow laugh, and fixed her eyes on Meredith. But such a look! It almost frightened the simple aged couple out of their senses. It was not a look of love, nor of hatred exclusively. Neither was it of desire or disgust, but it was a combination of them all. It was such a look as one fiend would cast on another, in whose everlasting destruction he rejoiced. Watty was glad to take his eyes from such countenances and look into the Bible, that firm foundation of all his hopes and all his joy.
"I request that you will shut that book, sir," said the horrible creature, "or if you do not, I will shut it for you with a vengeance."
And with that he seized it and flung it against the wall. Bessie uttered a scream, and Watty was quite paralysed, and although he seemed disposed to run after his best friend, as he called it, the hellish looks of the brownie interposed and glued him to his seat.
"Hear what I have to say first," said the creature, "and then pour your fill on that precious book of yours. One concern at a time is enough. I came to do you a service. Here, take this cursed wretched woman whom you style your lady, and deliver her up to the lawful authorities to be restored to her husband and her place in society, She has come upon one that hates her, and never said one kind word to her in his life, and though I have beat her like a dog, still she clings to me, and will not depart, so enchanted is she with the laudable purpose of cutting my throat. Tell your master and her brother I have spurned and kicked her, afflicting her night and day, and yet from my side she will not depart. Take her, claim the reward in full, and your fortune is made. And so farewell."
The creature bowed and went away. But the moment his back was turned, the lady fell a-screaming and struggling like one in agony, and in spite of all the old couple's exertions, she forced herself out of their hands and ran after the retreating Meredith. When he saw better would not be, he turned upon her, and by one blow with his stick struck her down, and not content with that, he continued to kick and baste her in such a manner as to all appearance would have killed 20 persons. The poor devoted dame could do nothing, but now and then utter a squeak like a half-worried cat, and writhe and grovel on the sward, till Watty and his wife came up and withheld her tormentor from further violence. He then bound her hands behind her back with a strong cord, and delivered her once more to the charge of the old couple, who contrived to hold her by that means and take her home. Watty had not the face to take her into the hall, but into one of the outhouses, where he brought her brother to receive her. The man of the law was manifestly vexed at her reappearance, and scrupled not to testify his dissatisfaction, for when Watty told him how the wretch had abused his sister, and that, had it not been for Bessie's interference and his own, the lady would have been killed outright. "Why, Walter, it is a great pity that he did not kill her outright," said he. "What good can her life now do to her? Or of what value is her life to any creature living? After one has lived to disgrace all connected with them, the sooner they are taken off, the better." The man, however, paid old Walter down his 2,000 marks, a great fortune for one like him in those days, and, not to dwell longer on this unnatural story, I shall only add very shortly that the Lady of Wheelhope soon made her escape once more, and flew, as by an irresistible charm, to her tormentor. Her friends looked no more after her, and the last time she was seen alive, it was following the uncouth creature up the water of Dewar, weary, wounded, and lame, while he was all the way beating her as a piece of excellent amusement. A few days after that, her body was found among some wild hags in a place called Crookburn by a party of the persecuted Covenanters that were in hiding there, some of the very men whom she had exerted herself to destroy, and who had been driven, like David of old, to pray for a curse and earthly punishment upon her. They buried her like a dog at the Yetts of Keppel, and rolled 3 huge stones upon her grave, which are lying there to this day. When they found her corpse, it was mangled and wounded in a most shocking manner, the fiendish creature having manifestly tormented her to death. He was never more seen or heard of in this kingdom, though all that countryside was kept in terror for him many years afterwards, and to this day they will tell you of the Brownie of the Black Hags, which title he seems to have acquired after his disappearance.